Oh, hi there, Al Dukes here. I started my New York City radio career on March 5th, 2001, when I was hired at WNEW to be the producer for the Ron And Fez Show. I had been living and working in Tampa, Florida for the previous 7 years. When I left those 7 years earlier, WNEW was a legendary rock station for many, many years. Loved listening to it when I was growing up. When I arrived, the station had flipped to FM Talk with Ron and Fez in middays and Opie and Anthony's in afternoons. Over the years, whenever we talk about working at WNEW, everybody seems to describe it as the Wild West, hence the name of this podcast. To me and to many others, it was the last great talk station in the country. There was a buzz in the building every time you would come to work. Was this the day one of the shows would do or say something that would get them fired, get the radio station thrown off the air? As a producer, would I be the one that would be doing something stupid or saying something stupid that would spark outrage? It felt dangerous to go to work every day. In August of 2002, Opie and Anthony's infamous Sex for Sam took place, and they were fired. By 2003, the station would change formats, and the FM talk industry would be completely dead on terrestrial radio. Each week on this podcast, I will talk to somebody directly involved at WNEW during the FM talk years. First up is Anthony Cumia. Anthony from the Opie and Anthony Show. Yeah, I think you guys got there in 98, and then I don't think the radio station turned into a talk station until 99.
Right. Okay, that makes perfect sense.
So when you got that job going from Boston to WNEW, did you know what you were walking into, that it wasn't a talk station and they were still doing classic rock?
Yeah, we did know that, but we didn't seem to care. At that point, personally, I was just happy to be employed again. After getting fired from Boston. But yeah, we knew it was a classic rock station. Coming from New York, we were pretty familiar with NEW and what it was at the time. But we didn't know that there would be such animosity from the classic rock jocks there. We didn't know that they were pretty strict about the playlist, and we would be playing a lot of music and not really doing what would turn out to be the Opie and Anthony Show. In time. So it was a little tricky when we first got there.
Now, and you guys went right into afternoon drive. Do you know who you replaced? Like what NEW jock was there?
They shuffled around a few jocks. I know they fired a couple too, but I don't recall who was doing afternoons before we got there. Maybe you do?
I do not. I do not know who that was, but so you get there, you guys are you doing like a version of the Opie and Anthony Show and playing music at the same time?
Yeah. It was very limited to what we could do. The time we got to talk was very limited. You have to play all these old songs and then pop in between when you're supposed to be reading station liners and whatnot, and try to do some kind of shock jock comedy.
And
so it was a little frustrating.
Did they tell you they were going to flip the station to talk and they wanted to bring you guys aboard first as they eased into that? Or did you go there thinking you were going to be on the classic rock station?
Well, the PD at the time, we had met with him, and he wanted us to do the show we were doing up in Boston, the Opie and Anthony Show. A little bit of music and a lot of comedy and talk and whatnot, interviews with comedians and musicians. But I think that he was having a hard time getting that point across to management. So when we got there, we knew eventually we were probably going to be able to talk a lot more. But for the beginning of our tenure there, we kind of knew that we'd have to play these songs. And then it just got out of control anyway. We stopped playing a lot of the songs and we started talking. It was it was a different time there. But we knew at the beginning we'd have to play a lot of songs and we weren't going to be able to do this kind of show we were doing immediately when we got there.
And what was the situation with Carol Miller in particular? I know there was some sort of argument or back and forth with her. Like, she was very serious about the music and didn't like you guys coming in and trashing the music, because I think you did that at one point as well. Like, we're just like these songs are over with. This is it. This, nobody cares about this music anymore. What was your run-in with her, and why was it on the air? Did you guys come on after her?
Yeah, Carol was one of the jocks there that just were, an institution. They were all these classic rock jocks that ended up at WNEW playing that same old music over and over and over. But
she was really into it.
Of course, Opie and myself were like personality-driven radio. So, to play the same old Who song again, and the Doors, and that have been played literally millions and millions of times, seemed to be a little, I don't know, boring. So, yeah. But these jocks, it's all they had left. It was really all they had left was the tie that they had with the music and the radio station being classic rock. So when we came in there, I think it spelt the end. They kind of saw the end of this whole thing coming. And some of them were really resentful. And Carol fell into that category. She was kind of resentful of the Opie and Anthony show coming into the church of WNEW. And we used to have these arguments and fights in the hallway about the shows. She would have a snide remark about our, shock jock type pee pee poo poo humor, what she called it, and we would talk about how nobody gave a shit about another Led Zeppelin song, and it just made for a very uncomfortable atmosphere. She came on after us, and at one point the program director actually said to Carol she had to wait in the office when we left the studio and walked to our office, so we wouldn't meet in the hallway and have one of our loud discussions in the middle of the station with the rest of the staff watching.
Were there any older rock jocks that embraced you guys when you showed up there?
Yeah, Pat St. John was really cool. Still is. Pat's a good guy. He was really nice to us. They used to leave faxes, and they'd send faxes and leave notes about Opie and Anthony and say, leave, you suck. So some of the jocks were really pissed. Scott Muni too.
He liked you or didn't like you?
What's that?
He liked you or didn't like you?
Oh, he liked us. Yeah, Scottso was a very old jock. He remembers sitting down with the Beatles.
Yeah, breakfast with
really,
the Beatles.
Really been in the business for many, many years. And we'd go into his office and sit down, and he'd tell us old stories about radio. It was pretty cool, actually. There was some good things that came out of being at that classic rock station when some of those jocks were there. But some of them were just, old jocks that got pushed aside, ended up at NEW, and knew it was probably going to be the final hurrah of their career.
And then when that whole thing finally ended and it flipped to FM Talk in 1999, what other local shows did they bring in at the time along with you guys?
God, there was various iterations of a sports talk show.
Sports Guys.
In the morning was the Sports Guys, yeah. And I think they called it the Sports Guys because it was constantly changing the people on the show. But that was kind of their attempt at doing something that competed with Mike and the Mad Dog and other sports programming in the morning. And then I guess in after middays was who was that? I know the radio chick was mornings after a while.
Yeah. She got moved around a little bit.
Yeah. And then, they brought in like some syndicated programs, or not really syndicated, but from DC and stuff.
Yeah, I think that was a little later on when they brought in Don and Mike. Are you thinking of?
Yeah, maybe that was later.
Yeah, that was a little later on.
Well, so, Ron and Fez.
Yeah,
Ron and Fez were on also, who were just great. That made for a really good combination. They came on after we did.
At first, when I got there in March of 2001 to start with Ron and Fez, they were on middays. We were on noon to 3.
Yeah, that's right. Oh my God, I've blocked all this out now.
and then they moved us to after you guys, which seemed to be a better fit. And I think the radio chick was on middays, and then there was like a best of O&A / Ben Sparks DJ segment.
Oh my God,
from like 2 to 3, right? So it was like it was best of O&A, and then at like 2:45. It would be Ben EW, where he would play like some live Kinks song or something. Right. And then into you guys at 3, and then Ron and Fez at 7. But I remember there were many times like sitting in the back with Ron and Fez, on the surface, you might look at their show and say, oh, they talked about, your favorite candy bar when you were growing up. Obviously, it was much deeper than that and more fun than that. But there were times when like you guys were doing such crazy shows that Ron would be sitting back to go, how are we supposed to go on now and do our topics when, like, you had the 55-gallon drum challenge going on. I remember that day in particular. Ron says, like, they're shooting girls with Uzi water guns filled with pig's blood, and now we're going to go in and do what's your favorite candy bar? Like, we can't do that.
Yeah. So they I guess they started out as ronandfez.com.
Yeah, overnights.
Yeah. I was doing overnights, and it was like kind of somehow related to the brand new internet thing that was
the internet.
Yeah, that crazy new thing. And then it kind of melded into more of a show that was conducive to being alongside the Opie and Anthony Show at the time. Because they started doing some crazy things too.
Well, I think they started that because of where they were following you guys, and you had to have some sort of something in the beginning of the show, so there wasn't like an immediate different show when your show ended at 7. What was your show prep like back then? Like, say at the height of Opie and Anthony on WNEW. What was that process like? I know you had like Rick as a producer, Ben was there, Stinky. What did people contribute to the show, and what was that? Was there talking before the show? Like, how did you guys figure out how you were going to fill your 4 hours?
Yeah, it was I think it was pretty original to radio to do prep the way we did. It was a minimalist kind of a thing. We would go over all the newspapers, all of us would go through the papers, find stories that we liked, something we could riff on or do a bit about. And then Rick and Stinky Garrett would add some ideas of sound, maybe what music to put to it, sound effects kind of a thing. And we would just roll like that. We rarely talked about what we were going to talk about on the air. It seemed to ruin the spontaneity of it. We liked being given a situation and then just dealing with it live as it happened. That seemed to be the best way to do things. It was surprising to everybody, including ourselves. And spontaneous in a way where the audience knew it was. A lot of these things were being constructed right in front of them. So it was a pretty original way to do radio. I think that was part of the success story. But yeah, it was a pretty minimalist approach to show prep.
Now, one of the things when I first got, I grew up a huge Howard Stern fan, as I think you were a big listener as well. when I first got to NEW, you know, when you were a big Howard fan back then, you hated everything else. Everything was a ripoff. Like I thought, oh, Opie and Anthony, these guys are ripping off Howard.
Yeah.
You know, when I very first got there. But one of the things that I learned from Ron and Fez was they would do a lot of sort of wrestling type things where the audience wasn't in on the I don't want to say fake part of it, but it was more like created drama, like wrestling might be. And I never thought that was a possibility. And having listened to Ron and Fez do it so smoothly, I started to think back on the Howard shows that I listened to, and I thought, well, was any of this stuff fake or set up? Did you guys do any of that on Opie and Anthony during the NEW years, where there was like set up, where you would set up either the producers to do something stupid on purpose, or a listener, or was it all sort of real? Yeah,
it's a great point about Ron and Fez. They were the masters of that.
Masters.
I mean, you know, they would play a work to the end, and it was really entertaining. We didn't do that. I don't think we could do it like that. That's how good Ron and Fez were at doing that. You look at it and go, like, we weren't people that could do some type of scripted thing, or just even an idea that we knew beforehand. We were going to talk to a guest and tell them to do a certain thing and have a villain. It just wouldn't have come off sincere, looking sincere. No, we just rolled with whatever really happened. We would agitate people. We would get people annoyed, but their reaction was absolutely honest. Yeah, we would take people and kind of manipulate them into doing things that maybe they didn't originally want to do, that we knew was going to be entertaining, that would make some drama for us, but it was all on the up and up.
And I always wondered this, and this is maybe a question for Opie, but you might know as well. Like, I always wondered, did Opie know that Ron and Fez were using me to screw with him, or did he really think I was a weird guy?
He really thought you were a weird guy. I mean, that was an incredible work. And it was hilariously funny. Again, it's textbook Ron.
It was unbelievable. Yeah.
Doing something like that. I mean, I don't know till just recently, perhaps, people in the audience and perhaps even Opie would be like, how is Al still doing something in radio? Like, how would someone so odd be able to hold down a job that long? But yeah, it was just the brilliance of Ron and you being dedicated to the bit.
Yeah, even like when I had got drunk that night and they tricked me into making out with a man, and then I kicked over your foosball machine.
Yeah.
Or your foosball table. Then Ron, like the next the following week, Ron's like, hey, you know what, you ought to see if we get a company to bring a pinball machine in here. He goes, it'd be awesome. And then he's like, yeah, on the air, just say you bought it for Opie. I was like, all right. And then Opie smashed it. And then the guy was like, did you guys smash my pinball machine? Yes. Yes, we did.
Oh my God. Yeah.
But like, that was Ron. Like, Ron wouldn't even let you in on it sometimes in the office of what he was doing. Like, the less people that were in on it, the better for him.
Yeah. He the puppet master, as we
but there was one other time that I remember when I was on the air saying that I wanted to be Opie's friend. Why isn't Opie my friend? And like Opie's girlfriend called in and was like, what is wrong with you? I was like, what's Opie really like at home? And I never knew whether he knew what we were doing or if he didn't.
No, absolutely not.
See, I felt like you were more in on it because you would hang out sometimes at night and you would you watch what they were doing, moving their chess pieces around. Those
were some of the greatest times I remember at NEW, where after the show, going back into the office, we'd hang out with the O&A show people. I'd hang out with Garrett and Opie and Ben, and we'd drink back there and smoke, and I'd play video games. and then I'd pop into the Ron and Fez show and hang out there, and they had a lot of audience members come up there, and we'd hang out and again drink and smoke, and it was like a party up there.
As I said, like anybody I talked to that worked there during that time, they'll always say it was some version of the Wild West. Like there didn't seem to be anybody in charge.
Yeah.
We would do those drinking shows on Friday night, and I would expense $300 worth of liquor, and it would get paid. It was so bizarre. Like nowadays, you don't even get anywhere near doing that sort of thing. Yeah. Did you have a lot of interaction with like Jeremy Coleman, who was the program director? Ken Stevens, I think, was the GM at the time. Were they very involved or very hands off?
No, they were really hands off. It was I think they considered NEW a station they didn't have to worry about. At the time, there was this thing where Mel Karmazin and some of the other executives over there would put a general manager in charge of a bunch of stations. Like he would get a region. So, Ken has to take care of Washington, D.C., New York, Philly, things like that. And they were so busy with other stations, and they figured that NEW was kind of on autopilot. So they didn't have a lot of interaction with us unless there was a problem. And there turned out to be some problems over the years. But I was really kind of the steer clear of the boss guy. Opie enjoyed more talking with Ken and Jeremy about radio and things, more of a traditionalist. I just thought, like with every other job I had, the less you saw the boss, the better.
Right.
You just do your job, go home and go, whew, I didn't have to see the boss today. That's kind of how I felt. There were weeks that would go by where we didn't see the GM, and Jeremy was, we got to the point where we were able to kind of manipulate him. He wasn't really a guy that could dominate employees. No. So we were able to do things that, it was really the last gasp of the shock jock era. And the ability to just do some of the most outrageous things with relative impunity.
I said it's like the only thing I can compare it to is in sports. Like if you are a really good athlete, your coach and the owner can do nothing to you. Yeah. Because you're so good and you're not replaceable. And that's right. The situation you guys were in there. Now, yeah. one of the things, in a lot of the country, when Howard was coming along and you guys were getting those same stations that Howard had, you would get the afternoon show. In New York, Howard had his own thing going on at K-Rock. But there was a time when there was rumored that you guys were not allowed to say Howard Stern's name. And I can say that was true, as I had to work the dump button and we had to take out any reference to Howard Stern, including you going, hoo, Robin. And it was funny when I first got the job doing the dump button, Craig Schwab was doing it prior. Yeah. And he was told to take out any Howard Stern references. And I know there was a little while where you were calling him Big Bird, and that was going through as if like Craig Schwab had no idea that Howard Stern was Big Bird. Yeah. Was there an incident, a particular incident that caused you guys not to be able to mention his name?
Yeah, there were a few that built up to it, but there was a proverbial straw in that whole thing. Apparently, Howard's daughter went to the Jingle Ball for what station used to throw that?
Z100.
Oh, Z100, right? Another station from the past. Used to throw Jingle Ball. It was a concert, I believe, Madison Square Garden. Just a huge thing with.
They still do it, by the way, every year.
Do they? Wow. Yeah. So apparently, Howard's daughter went there and maybe had imbibed some alcohol or something else. And we had a lot of cop fans. Oh my God. so many of the NYPD guys were fans of the O&A show. So they would tell us things that were happening. We got a call from Keith the cop, and he said, yeah, I'm getting a report that Howard's daughter is at the hospital, and they're Howard's here, and Beth, not Beth at the time, it was his
Allison.
wife. Yeah, Allison. Ooh, Allison. and they seemed very upset. Like he was giving us a blow-by-blow description of what was going on, and it just turned out to be the daughter, probably like girls do, were out having a good time and maybe drank a little too much, and they took her to the hospital. But we thought it would be a great opportunity to do a bit. So we got on the air and started playing music that you'd hear at the Jingle Ball at the time from various pop artists and doing sound effects and voices of Howard and drunk girls. And it just, it was really funny to us, especially both of us not having kids or anything.
Right.
And that was it. Howard just went right to the top and said, I want you to fire these guys. Like, you get rid of them. And while they couldn't do that, they assured Howard that we would never, ever again speak his name. And we were told not to say his name anymore. And it made a lot of animosity and resentment. We didn't like being told we couldn't do something, especially something like that. It wasn't like the FCC rules or company policy kind of a thing. It just was a very personal thing that we weren't allowed to mention Howard, kind of a power play. But we snuck it in as much as we could. There was a point where we would just play the clip from the Kid Rock song where he said radio edit.
Right.
Radio edit. Yeah. Oh, so radio edit was saying this. And then they said, no, you can't even say radio edit on the radio. You can't say radio edit. So it really got out of hand with management. That was probably up until we got fired. That was probably the biggest thing that management had to deal with, was us talking about Howard, and they would be dragged in and have to explain to Mel and other people why we were talking about Howard.
Which is funny because, he spent his whole career trashing Imus and Man-Cow and all these guys along the way.
That was a little odd. Yeah, we thought that was a bit hypocritical, but, I guess when his kids were involved, that's where it usually goes really bad.
There seemed to be, and we were saying earlier how, like, if you liked Howard back then, you hated everybody else. But there was a time when there was starting to be a shift where people were listening to Howard in the morning and then you guys in the afternoon. If NEW put you guys on against Howard, how do you think that would have gone? Do you think you just would have split the audience and it worked better being on in the afternoon?
Yeah, they knew it worked better in the afternoons for us and not to go against Howard. Not that I don't think Howard was just a juggernaut. There was no way a personality-driven talk show could beat Howard. And I loved the show we were doing. I had the utmost confidence in it, but I really wasn't that confident we would ever beat Howard. But we would probably take away enough numbers where he wouldn't be number one anymore. And that was their big issue. Howard being number one, you're able to get that sales revenue. And it was very counterproductive to the company to have us battle each other.
Yeah. So
having us in afternoons and Howard in mornings was kind of that was the solution to that whole problem. The only thing was they had a hard time selling both of the shows. That was the reason they gave us for not being on the same station as Howard, because logically we should have been doing afternoons at K-Rock while Howard did mornings at K-Rock. But they wanted to kind of keep it a music thing. And they said we would never be able to sell anything. You guys are on those lists that, the big sponsors steer clear of shock jock shows and the controversy. So they kept us at NEW, kept Howard at K-Rock, kept him in the mornings, kept us in afternoons. You got to keep them separated.
Yeah, you were doing live reads for Stacker too.
Yeah, yeah.
Horny
The
goat
sponsors were Horny Goatweed and Stacker 2. Oh my God. It's like, where's the Ford Motor Company?
Yeah, for some reason they don't want to be tied to you guys.
Where's Dell Computers? I don't get it. Why am I selling this magic elixir that gives you erections?
And how did you become the person that was using the sound effects? Normally that goes to a producer, not one of the two main hosts. How did you end up doing that?
Yeah, that was something I loved doing. And that's a kind of a tribute to Fred Norris, man. I mean, like you said, being a Howard Stern fan, I was probably right there as one of the biggest fans. Like if you took the category of the biggest Howard Stern fans, I would be in there. And the way Fred worked those sound effects was so funny. He could take something, it was a situation that was kind of funny, and just put it over the top hilarious with the sound effect. And I wanted to do that. I wanted to be the guy that was able to trigger those sound effects. It's a lot faster. It's a lot more in line with, the vision I had for a bit or a segment or a phone call, to throw those things in at the absolute right time and the right sound effect. And it just made things hilariously funny. And I never really trusted anyone else to be able to pop that in at the right time. So with technology the way it was too, it wasn't like you had to shuffle carts and grab a cart and put it in there. It was all digital, so it was a press button thing, and I knew exactly where certain effects were on the board, so I could hit it really quickly. It didn't really take away from me concentrating on talking or doing the show, so it worked out both ways. I could still be one of the hosts and still work that goddamn sound effect machine.
Yeah, that instant replay machine. It would have different banks, right? There were like 50 buttons, and then you could have different banks of those 50 buttons. Did you have it divided up? Like, for instance, I remember one time, like, you used to like to play all those clips over a music bed, right? And I remember there was a time with the Michael Jackson molestation stories, and that was big in the news. You came back with a Michael Jackson song, and all the drops were about that. So did you have like a bank of like, were they divided up into categories in banks? The
first bank number one was the ones I would use most often. And then the rest of the banks were pretty much topic driven. Yeah, like if somebody was caught, like Michael Jackson, with children doing inappropriate things. That was a bank. There was a bank about homosexuality. There was a bank about minorities. There was a bank. There were certain banks that were, conducive to the topics we would talk about. And and just watching people like I don't know, anybody that was in the room, Steve C and Ben, Rick, just watching them laugh their asses off at a sound effect, a movie drop or something that was gold to me.
Like, I have still never seen The Godfather, but I know all of the lines.
Wait, maybe you are a weird guy. Who hasn't seen The Godfather?
Too long. It's 3 hours long.
It is very long.
Let's talk about the dump buttons. So, so weird. So Craig Schwab, who was the assistant program director at the time, he was doing the dump button. But then I moved. Honestly, I needed to get off Ron and Fez. I was like too stressed out from that show. It was making me crazy.
They rotated people in and out of that show quite often.
I know, like, looking back, some people think I like worked on that show for 5 years. I was only there like a year and a half.
Isn't that funny? Yeah.
Before I moved out of it. So I was like, all right, well, I could do this. I'll learn the dump button, and Craig Schwab taught me the dump button, all this stuff. And, when you guys would have comedians come in, it was much easier to run the dump button because they were, the stuff that they would say was so blatant that it was easy. But like you and Jimmy were so good at walking that line, and, whoever was working the dump button really had just, I think it was like between 3 and 8 seconds to make a decision on, in the context, do we know what this means? And then the other thing was I was just getting done training with Craig Schwab, and then that Friday was going to be Sex for Sam.
Oh God!
And I said to him, I said, you're really going to, one of my very first days is going to be Sex for Sam? He goes, listen, that's the easiest day. He goes, they're super aware of what they're saying because of the content. God. That it's going to be no problem. So of course that went on, and there were things, words that came out over the air that I dumped out of that were graphic in nature. But right. I always wondered, after that ended, when the Sex for Sam thing happened and it blew up, what came out of your speakers was not offensive. What happened in the church, I guess, was offensive.
Right.
So yeah. Were you mad at anyone in particular that happened? Were you mad at me? Were you mad at Paul Mercurio, the comedian who kept pushing and pushing and pushing? Were you mad at yourselves for doing that? Like, where were you when that whole thing ended?
All of the above. I was just like generally angry that the whole thing happened, and you try to cast blame, and then after a while, after a few years actually, you start realizing, oh yeah, I have to be responsible for my own actions and what happened on the show that day. So I did go through a while though where I was just pissed at everyone, Mercurio, and like, what an idiot. Why did he do that? Why did he say that? Well, he could have just left, and the coulda, shoulda, wouldas going through your head. And I don't know. I think though it was kind of, the whole thing was coming to an end. That whole shock jock thing was really in its death throes.
But did that kill it, or was it, you think it was heading that way prior to Sex for Sam?
I think that had something to do with it. I think also the Janet Jackson thing had something to do with it. This weird fake morality that started oozing into society. The cancel culture, if you will, even looking back at the original days of what we call cancel culture now, just the very few people that are supposedly offended that want people gone. That's pretty much what we were in. We were constantly trying to avoid that. But we were constantly trying to get people to try to cancel us. That was the thing about shock jockery, was that you wanted to push it so far that you were right on the brink of being fired every day. That was a goal. I want to come so close to being fired every day, and that way I know I'm doing my job. And I think everybody that plays that game is eventually going to step over the line, and that's what happened to us.
Well, that's the thing. It's like you feel like you have to top what you did last time, and these shows being on every day, 4 hours a day. It's like, what else are you going to do? But that being said, there was an energy in that place. And for those few years where you walked in, you didn't know whether it was going to be the last day of the radio station. You didn't know if somebody was going to be physically injured. There were no bosses around. There was something very interesting about that does not exist anywhere today.
No, it was a culture, a corporate culture that just you do not see anymore. Occasionally stories pop up about Infinity Broadcasting and all of the iterations of Infinity over time, when other companies took it over and they'd sell it and merge with this one and that one, regardless of what flag it was under. Every so often a story comes up where you'll hear there was a problem at a Christmas party, or the culture of some of these meetings or retreats that the GMs would go on and think, and all these little dirty stories come out of harassment and other things. And every time I read it, I go, I believe this 100%.
Right.
Like, it was just, it was a men's club for the most part. It was it was like Mad Men. It was really that last gasp of that men walking around, dirty jokes, slapping ass, inappropriate language, all that stuff that now is an instant firing offense was just commonplace. And funny is sometimes I'll read who was complaining about it and think, I remember seeing you at some of those parties, laughing, drinking, palling around with everybody. So why now do you look back at it as a problem? Everyone was in on it. Everyone knew what was going on. It was a very debaucherous time and place to work.
Well, yeah, there was an area at NEW where you would walk down the hallway of the offices, and then you would go through this door, and that's where the studios were. And the computers back there, the screensavers were women with vegetables in strange places. And management was just like, that's the creative people. When you go through those doors, those were the doors. They're like, when you go through those doors, those are the creative types work back there. So anything goes.
Could you imagine something like that now?
No.
Someone's computer with some literally pornography on it.
Right, pornography.
In the workplace. And just...
Then we had another computer that was just all stolen songs from Napster, which we would just do whatever we want with on the air.
Oh my God. Yeah, it's really amazing to think that we've changed so much that just would not for a second be accepted.
Now, one of the things when you guys were fired and then sat out a couple years and went to XM, I think it was you or Opie that I heard a conversation about that said, like, the difference between being at WNEW on the regular radio dial versus being on XM, and when you guys first went there, you were even on an additional pay channel.
Yeah.
That only, like, your dedicated fans listened. You didn't get to accidentally piss somebody off that didn't know what the show was, or that someone couldn't accidentally stumble upon it to get offended. Did you find that? Like, do I remember that from you guys having that conversation?
Oh yeah.
That, like, even where you are now at Compound Media, like, those are your hardcore people.
Right. It's that was something that was we were pretty concerned about that. A lot of really funny moments came out of a wrong number, somebody making a mistake and calling the studio, the hotline or the request line accidentally, and us just rolling with it. And those things just wouldn't happen. Or somebody getting mad. Yeah. We used to get people that called up and said, shut up and play the music, because they were pissed that it wasn't classic rock we were playing. And we would go off on them. And people like that kind of combative thing on the phone. And then just getting attention. Yeah. If we did something that offended somebody and they wanted to pursue it, sometimes you'd get press. Sometimes it would make for a great radio segment. But when we went to XM, subscriber-based platform, that just stopped. And it was something that we remember liking having in our arsenal, but we had to move on. It just wasn't the same kind of atmosphere anymore. And
then I know the company tried to kind of redo the format again with Free FM at 92.3 when Howard left, but at that point the format was really dead, right? There weren't many people that could do those types of shows. You weren't really allowed to do the type of shows. And do you think the Opie and Anthony show from NEW was dead at that point? As we knew it from NEW, from NEW to 92.3 and those years in between, did something disappear from the magic of that show?
Yeah. A lot of restrictions were put on us as far as what we could do in studio. They started worrying about insurance. they started worrying. We used to do things like the 55-gallon drum challenge that, you couldn't do that. Someone might die. It became something that corporate started getting involved in. They started dipping their hands in, and the lawyers and insurance and management started just saying, yeah, you can't do that anymore. Well, and Opie's thing was always to say, no, your job is to figure out how we can do it. And they said, it can't be done.
Yeah.
And they started restricting us from even having girls undress in the studio and things like that. And that's when we knew that whole genre was done.
Well, that's the other thing. Like, even in the early days of the WNEW website, you guys were able to post topless photos of listeners.
Yeah.
All somebody had to do is click that. I'm over 21 or whatever it was, and you click the button. That would like, you would bring that down to a guy who worked in the computer department, and he would put them up on the website. It's crazy.
It was, that was again another thing that you just wouldn't see now. But the audience wanted to see it. It was kind of the beginning of that whole thing. Let's put video up and pictures of what used to just be the theater of the mind part of radio. Hey, there's a naked girl in the studio. We've seen in private parts and other movies and things about Howard. But we just figured, let's put it up there. Let the people actually see it now that there's a medium for it. And again, you'd never see anything like that happen today.
I think you guys were definitely early on with the technology, with the instant feedback, similar to like what Twitter is now with the Pal Talk cameras. Everyone's got cameras in their place now.
Yeah, that was
even the syndication underground. People were getting feeds of the show somehow around the country.
Yeah, we kind of started that. I've always been a tech guy. I love it. And when we were in Boston, up in Massachusetts there at AAF, we would take pictures. I bought a digital camera. This thing was a brick. And I had a laptop. And this is, the mid-90s. And I started uploading pictures, digital pictures from the studio of some of the girls that would come in to a personal website that I made. And people loved it. I didn't know anything about bandwidth costs and things like that, or there wasn't really a good way to compress pictures and video. So they sent me a bill for like $12,000 one month. and I called them up. I go, wait, what is this? I'm just putting stuff up on the internet. And they're like, yeah, there's a cost to that. They let me slide on the bill, but that's when I had to start thinking about what I wanted to put up. Because I was just putting up uncompressed video of girls taking showers in our studio and things like that. So I had to really cut back and just start putting little thumbnails up.
And then how did Jimmy Norton become a full-time person on that show? Were you looking to find another guy and he became that guy from coming in and along with other comics, or how did that evolve?
Well, I'm sure if you talk to Opie, you'll get a different answer. I don't think I wasn't looking for anything like that. I liked the comics that would come in, that would rotate in and out. But apparently Opie has said, and you could confirm it with him, that he started seeing a rift between the two of us back then.
Oh,
yeah. And he thought we needed a third person in there to kind of, can you still hear me?
I can.
Okay, I just got a default microphone has changed to some, I don't know. Yeah, he thought that we needed a third person in there kind of as a buffer, kind of to move the show along, because he assumed we were having an issue. The personality issues between myself and Opie, I don't even want to get into. I've done it enough over the course of the years. But
they're all on YouTube.
Yeah. At that time, I was still skipping around. Everything's hunky dory. And he apparently had some issues with our relationship. So Jimmy had come in with Dice. Dice was going to be in the area, and we loved having Dice on as a guest. And Jimmy was on tour with him, and he brought Jimmy in, and Jimmy sat down. It was just hilariously funny, of course. Like myself, Opie had approached Jimmy and said, "Hey, would you like to come in and maybe come in next week?" It's the same thing he did to get me on his show.
Right.
And then Jimmy just started coming in, and when it came time to negotiate some things, we got some money for Jim, and he became a kind of a part-time, full-time member of the show.
There never seemed to be like a rift between you and Jimmy, though, which I would have think would have happened if you felt like, there was a third guy coming on and you weren't really all that interested in it.
No, I right from the start, I just knew he was great for the show. He brought certain things to the show that myself or Opie just couldn't bring to the show. There was a certain honesty. We had done in our radio careers up until the point where Jimmy became part of the show. We had constantly hid things. We didn't know that it was kind of a good thing to acknowledge that a joke bombed. Self kind of making fun of yourself, goofing on yourself, things like that. Jimmy brought to the show. We were standard like shock jocks, over the top, always right, always. You're goofing on someone else, never yourself. And Jimmy brought that whole aspect to the show where a joke would bomb and Jim would look and start laughing. He goes, oof, ugh. and we'd sit there at the beginning. We were horrified. Like, what's he doing? Why would you acknowledge that the joke bombed? And that was his, comic thing coming through. And it worked so well. It really changed the dynamic of the show in a way.
Yeah. And then when you guys were bringing in all those comics, it was sort of like, one of the things that I didn't like about Howard was where he started bringing in celebrity guests. And I always felt like when you guys are bringing the comics, they would come in and be part of the show as opposed to being interviewed.
Yeah, there could be a comic that, on stage, hilariously funny, the act is great, and then they really didn't have an ability to sit down and just bullshit with guys. Like, that was the biggest part of our show, was just guys sitting in a room and talking about guy things and busting balls and laughing. And most of the New York comics from the Comedy Cellar and Caroline's and the big clubs in the city were hilariously funny guys just hanging out. So when we got the likes of Patrice O'Neill and Otto and George, Rich Voss, Bob Kelly, Nick DiPaolo, all those guys were just funny guys. And we'd rather have one of those than 10 guys who are going to come in, sit down and do their act and, hand us a piece of paper of topics to ask them so they could just do their act. I think we sold a lot of tickets for these guys because the audience liked them as people and knew when they were talking that they were funny guys, and their stage show was probably hilariously funny, even though they weren't doing it on the radio, on our show. And it did work out exactly that way. People became very fond of these guys and how funny they were just being guys. We loved that aspect of the O&A show, was just the hang out and bust each other's balls.
Yeah, all of those guys. I that was my first introduction to all of those comics. Bill Burr, all those guys was coming through Bill. Your show. Yeah. They,
at that time, comics, they were looking for any outlet. They're a bunch of whores, so they'll go on any show to promote themselves. But our show was starkly different. It was a place where they could just sit down, kind of reminiscent of the famous table at the Comedy Cellar, and talk about things, talk about life and relationships, just hanging out.
Did Tough Crowd come from that, or did your bringing in the comics come from Tough Crowd? I don't remember which.
I think Tough Crowd came from that. Tough Crowd kind of spawned after we got the boot.
Yeah, because it was all those same guys.
Yeah, it was the same guys, and it was kind of the same thing. Let's talk about what's going on in the news, and in between, we'll rip each other apart. Colin's no dummy. He knew that was a great format for a show.
Another show that would never air today.
Oh my God! Watching some clips, watching some things from the Patrice documentary that is up on Comedy Central. It was just like the stuff we got away with. And until you see it again on video or hear it on audio, you can't believe it. Like I think of some bits that we did or segments and things we did on NEW that I'm sure were on satellite radio, but they weren't. It was on regular over-the-air broadcast radio. And it's insane to think.
Well, even just in the time from NEW to 92.3, when I was on the dump button at NEW and John Entwistle from the Who died, and a caller suggested maybe Dice Clay would join the Who, and then you were doing all these Who songs as Dice Clay, and you had your own sound effect of a beep, right? So you were you were doing Squeeze Box as Dice, but you were saying like puh, then the beep, ussy, right?
Yeah.
And that aired like that. But then when we went to replay it at 92.3 a couple years later, I had to go through and take out all of that, like even bleep those fully. So just even in that time, things kept evolving as far as like what was no good anymore or what was okay.
Yeah. I forgot about that. Some people post videos. There's so much stuff up on YouTube, and they'll post something that I haven't seen or heard in years, maybe a decade or two. And I just start laughing my ass off. And it's funny. It's like, you're laughing. Why are you laughing at yourself? And it's like, no, I'm laughing because it's Dice singing Who songs. Like, I don't think it's me doing it. It's Dice singing Who songs, and it's hilariously funny. So I'll still listen when somebody posts something. I'll listen to it and go, "Oh my God, how did we get away with that on regular radio?" So
right,
yeah, I did not envy you guys in the dump room. There was a lot of resentment to you guys at you guys, but what a thankless job that was. I have to be the guy that cuts off something that these guys in the studio want to do and the people listening want to hear. And the villains it made over the years.
Yeah, that's how I knew it was over at K-Rock, when you guys were super nice about it and coming down the hall and going, "Hey, we want to play this." Who are these guys? Normally I had to keep this door locked so it wasn't kicked in.
Yeah, the locked door and the key that you turn, and the Van Halen song would play from the transmitter.
Yes. Well, I appreciate you taking time to do this. I really wanted to, like, I think back on NEW all the time, and it's what I want radio to be now. And unfortunately, it just doesn't exist anymore. Like, that format doesn't exist. That dangerous feeling doesn't exist anymore. So I wanted to talk to the people directly involved in what I feel like was that last station. As you said, that was the end of it. That Sex for Sam was the nail in the coffin, as they say. So
yeah. Hey, it was good to be part of it, though. You know.
Oh, like,
to actually be part of an era like that, arguably started in the 70s with some of these guys, Steve Dahl, and of course Howard coming up, and that whole shock jock period through the 80s and 90s was huge. There were a lot of copycats. There were a lot of bad people that were just bad at it, forced, but. We can say we were right there on that battlefield at the end.
Right. And do you think, like, is it better? Like, it's like that Neil Young lyric, is it better to burn out or turn to rust? Like, would you prefer like what happened to you or what Howard's doing to his legacy?
I kind of like that we went out the way we did. It is part of radio lore. As it goes, I'm still having fun and doing my thing now. So I enjoy talking to people and,
how long are you on a day over a compound?
2 hours.
That's the way to do it. These
2
4-hour
hours a day,
shows.
4 days a week.
Perfect.
Oh yeah, I love it. It's been 7 years now. Can't
Yeah. No, and
Yeah.
you got multiple people. I was like, how's he paying all these people to do these shows?
Yeah, it's it works.
Yeah.
the place works.
And you do that from your house, or you have a studio in New York still?
No, I got a studio in New York now. I've had that for 6 years. I only did the show from my house for a year, and then we got a studio at 35th and Broadway, right
Nice.
by the Garden, Penn Station. And yeah, we do it in there. We have a whole control room, studio set up, a green room, kind of hangout place. Yeah, I got a lot of really funny people that get it, that aren't afraid. We've been doing these comedy tours now too, where we do comedians of the compound, and we're going all over this summer: Austin, Cleveland, Boston, Philly. And while they're not these giant virus tour things that we were doing with O&A, it's great to get out and still see the people having a great time.
Yeah, and you have people all around the country that are subscribers.
Yeah, it all around the world, actually. There's people I hear from Ireland and Australia and Italy. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for doing this. I appreciate it.
Oh, Al, no problem.
This is awesome.
Man. I love it. Love talking to you about this shit. Take it easy.
See ya. Oh, hi there, Al Dukes here. Welcome to episode 2 of my WNEW podcast. I've been having a bit of a hard time getting some of the guys to commit. Opie seemed really into it when I first approached him, and now I can't really seem to get him to return any more of my emails. Jim Norton also seemed very interested, but I'm having a hard time getting him to commit to a time as well, so hopefully both or one of those work out. Fortunately, I was able to get time with my next guest, Ron Bennington, one half of the Ron And Fez Show from the WNEW Talk Days. I had not had an extended conversation with Ron for a really long time, so it was really great to catch up with him about the WNEW years. Here's my talk with Ron Bennington. Sounds good.
Is that something you even care about, or you
sound? No, sound
Yeah,
I do care about.
I don't know. When I listen to FAN, I go, "What the fuck is going on there?"
No, sound is very important. Now, I know, like in your Florida days, you were top of the food chain, right? You were a morning show there in many cities, all the big cities, very popular. So how is it that you ended up in New York at NEW, but taking an overnight shift?
Well, the whole point was, that show, the first show, the Ron and Ron show, fell apart. The shift stuff never mattered to me in radio. I always thought it was like ridiculous. I hated morning radio. So, you do it, right? It's awful.
Yeah, it stinks.
It's the worst.
It takes years off your life with the lack of sleep and waking up in the middle of the night.
Yeah, and you just really don't have a life. You nap like a lunatic. So, I had never had any plans on doing morning radio again. And then, we're going to, okay, what are we going to do now that the one show had ended? And me and Fez decided we wanted to work together. And we were talking to some people, and then Jeremy Coleman was the guy for us. And he was like, "Hey, we could do something, blah, blah, blah. Do you realize how many people are in this shift and that shift?" And, I had the things to roll these things out nationally and all that kind of stuff. And so we said, okay, when you get something together, give us a call.
Did you meet him at some sort of like radio convention?
No. I think we might have sent him something because, there was only a couple of real FM talk stations in the country then. And he was the guy, who had the big station in DC. And, he called us, and then he flew down and hung out with us for a while. And we were like, we don't know what we're going to do. He was like, but let's do something.
Now, after Ron and Ron had ended, and you and Fez were doing a morning show in Daytona Beach, right?
Yeah, we were really doing that as kind of hey, can we even do this? Can we, you know what I mean? It was kind of an off-Broadway deal.
Because Fez was on Ron and Ron, but he was sort of a character, right? Was he like how much would he talk per hour?
Well, that's a really great question, because when we were doing rock radio, he talked way less than I personally thought. I only found out later that he didn't get a lot of mic time. And that's because, I didn't really come from radio, and I was laughing just as hard during the commercials and stupid rock songs than anything else. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he was always hilarious to me, just the funniest. So we had to figure out the broadcasting aspect of it, as if it would work or not. And it was also a time that I was just getting sober, like really clean for the first time probably ever. And so we were kind of tiptoeing into it a little bit, but having a ton of fun, but not exactly sure where it was going. As a matter of fact, at one point I said, why don't we just go out as a stand-up team? We'll do a stand-up team like it was in the 1960s. And he was like, I'm not comfortable unless everybody knows me. You know what I mean? I don't want to go out and have to sell Fez from the start every night. And I still think that was a mistake.
Yeah.
Because I think he's hilarious in front of an audience. But, he also always had this kind of a control thing about what he was willing to do. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't even know, because he was an actor when he was in college, but I didn't know that he was really nervous before he went on a stage, because he was always great.
Yeah. So then was NEW a talk station already when you were originally talking to Jeremy, or was it going to flip to talk? Like where was WNEW in that process? Because I know Opie and Anthony got there when they were still playing classic rock music, and it was Opie and Anthony and all the old rock jocks who had seen a change coming. So certainly Opie and Anthony weren't really welcomed when they got there.
No, they've never been welcomed anywhere in their careers. That's the beauty of those guys. They had flipped, I think, right before, but whoever was the PD was gone. And, and then Ken and Jeremy came in as GM and PD. And he said, you guys want to go to New York? And I always wanted to live in New York my whole life. And we're like, we got to do this.
But you had already had a family. So was that weird to say, hey, we're going to up and go to New York when you had lived in Florida most of your life?
Well, first of all, they had lived in Florida. My kids lived in Florida their life. But no, my kids loved it. They love New York City. They're not like you.
Yeah.
Where you're some kind of suburban weirdo.
Mm-hmm.
They were very cool people and still are cool people.
They were
like we jumped at the opportunity as a family. Like we loved it. And we loved it from day one, even though moving into New York City is about as tiring as you could get. Like nothing is easy about New York City. And I remember at one point just being like exhausted between personal life and then trying to figure out NEW. And I'm just like, I feel like I work a real job all of a sudden. You know what I mean? Right. Instead of being off at 10 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. You were working all day. And it was just living a life that, it's not, New York City is not set up to be easy. And until you find that rhythm, which always takes everybody like a couple of months. But no, I didn't have any, I didn't have any concerns about was it going to last long or not last long, because I felt like, I'll go do stand up or I'll do something. I don't feel like I put a lot of pressure on myself or my family about any of this. Was that a radio thing to get to the number one market, or you just like the idea of New York? New York City. New York City was it. And it's still like New York and those telephones was a high like it's hard to explain to anyone who doesn't do this. You know what I mean? Like I had done all of Florida, and on any given night, the calls were better than all the time that I was in Florida. You know what I mean? Just callers that were hysterical. I don't know if the time you were with us that you did Comedy Pyramid,
yes,
stuff like that.
Yeah.
Those things were unbelievable. And then I would just, talk to somebody, and I go, "You're funny, man. Why don't you come down and hang out with us some nights?" And that's how we ended up with most of the producers.
Right.
They're just people we thought were funny and we should try to figure out, what to do with. But that time, and on my way there, a program director called me up because I didn't know O&A. And he goes, "Hey, O&A, fuck with everybody, just be careful." And I was like, I don't know them. You know what I mean? I don't give a fuck, because I couldn't imagine worrying about such a thing. And then me and Fez I picked him up at the airport. Me and him were driving into New York. And I think they had like an hour best of every day of O&A at a certain time.
Yeah, I think from 2 to 3 before they would come on.
Yeah. And we were listening to it, and it was fucking hysterical. I remember it, like Anthony was doing this Bill Clinton voice, but it was like he was on Cops or something. And we were laughing our asses off. And we're like, these fucking guys are good. You know what I mean? Like we thought radio guys were hacked because we hadn't run into anybody who was coming at it the way we did for all those years. So we were like already juice coming into town.
And then when you were bringing like Fez, I felt like I could, I felt like I knew what Fez was going through in some ways. Like I have no family, as far as like I have no wife, no kids. So when Fez was coming with you to New York, did you feel like you were bringing along another kid in Fez? Like you had to look out for him. He didn't know what New York City was. You guys really came as a group to the city, almost like a family, like he was part of the family. Well,
he was part of my family in Florida. You know what I mean? Like Fez and I, because I knew Fez got into radio because I was doing radio. You know what I mean? Like I knew Fez from this little comedy club I had started. He was like an open micer. And then when he graduated from college, I guess, he came to me and he goes, "Hey, I have a degree in broadcasting. You think I could just come down? It's not a big deal. You got your degree for no reason. You know what I mean? You just come in, and if you're good, it'll work out, So, but Fez was incredibly, and still is very, very close with my family and me. I talk to him every day just about. I just felt like it's something you got to take a shot at. I just don't sit around and think about things like that. If somebody calls you up and they say, "Here's an opportunity," I think the regret that you will have that it is if you play it safe,
Yeah, I don't know if it's like that anymore. I think about that a lot. Like radio guys now, do they want to leave? Is it better to be the big guy in Tampa, or because that's a great life? Or do you try to go to a bigger market and get a bigger audience and try to become a success in a place like New York City?
I think the biggest mistake you can make is hanging around too long anywhere. You know what I mean? Like the only fun in radio is the startup. The startup is a blast. But to be that guy doing time and temp and, back selling a laundry list of rock songs, that's a death sentence, man. You know what I mean? That you might as well be selling tires or something. It just doesn't make any sense to do that. What really is fun is to have a project, not a job.
And how would you describe that show, the NEW show? And let's say the time when it was on after Opie and Anthony at 7:00 at night.
Well,
when people would...
Yeah, the show went through a couple of different things, right? First, I remember Jeremy said, "We need a hook, because I got to sell this to the bosses." And I don't know who I was talking to, but I came up with the .com idea. Like, oh, this is going to be a show about websites and blah, 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 because it was the big thing at the time. And the salespeople thought it was amazing. Like they were so excited because they would come after this new money. And I remember very early on, I'd only been there a little while, we went down to a place they called Silicon Alley for some reason. There was a bunch of .com places, and it was going to be the East Coast version of Silicon Valley. And we meet with this guy, and he writes a check like I never saw in Florida. And the whole thing, it was like free phone or phone free, and you weren't ever going to have to pay bills again. No more phone bills. You're going to talk to each other through the computer, you know? And I'm like, yeah, talk to each other through the computer. Yeah, love it. And they want it to be like, this is how you're going to do the show. And I'll go, yeah, we'll do that. And we'll do phones, but we'll do this too. And me and the sales guy, we leave there with this enormous check. And I don't think the thing ever worked, even slightly. And we were going through all these stupid people who, you know, they had money and, this is the way it works. And you're going to get paybacks for every time that you buy something. I go, yeah, because people are going to buy things on the computer. Sure, I get it. And then we get a nickel back from you, whatever it is. Or then we can get some kind of shoes for it or something. And then the whole .com bubble busted. And you know, luckily we didn't have to do that anymore. This bullshit thing that we had set up that we did like 10% of the show was that, 90% was us fucking around.
And that was when the internet was weird. Like there was a guy who had a website where he was going to chop off his own foot or something, and you would talk to that guy.
All kinds of shit like that. And here's the thing, as I remember, they hadn't even worked out Google yet. You know what I mean? So you were still doing Ask Jeeves, and people couldn't even find websites most of the time. Like people would set up a website, but how do you find, you know, everyone forgets Google put everything together. You know, Yahoo used to blow, all that stuff was crazy. So then we moved down. Jeremy said, you don't have to do the .com anymore. And then, because, you know, I have to tell you, I mean, I was crazy about O&A. I just felt like we had met guys that were much like us. Because I remember when I was in Florida, Sonny Fox said to me, you were the first guy that ever used his own name and his own voice. He goes, it totally freaked me out. This is that transition that I had made. And then I saw Anthony the same way. He was the same guy as he was off the air. And before that, you know, people were doing radio voices. You know, even shock jocks were doing radio voices. So so the whole point was to, okay, O&A are going in one direction. Let's make sure we don't do the same thing. So they were heavy conversation. We went heavy phones. You know, we had naked chicks. We had cool chicks that were listeners who would come in and party with us on Fridays. You know what I mean? Just do something that was similar, but not stepping on the show before you. And it was really working. I mean, it was a really hot time to be doing it. It was still, I think it might be the most fun I've ever had.
For sure. But it was nerve-wracking too. Like it felt like every day that place, everyone was trying to top what they had done the day before for 4 hours. And it's like, I felt like you couldn't keep up with that. Eventually you're going to hit a spot where you can't keep topping yourselves.
Well, you know, that happened to us with Ron and Ron, where we were like, we did 5,000 people at this morning show. The next time we want to have 7,000 people come out, and, you know, we did this and that. So we always just tried to get bigger. And what happens is what happened to O&A, that it eventually, you know, imploded on them.
Right. Because you have to keep pushing it a little bit each time.
Right. But see, the thing is, we weren't going to do that, Ron and Fez, because we were really not doing the stunt stuff in the same way that those guys were. And that's the dangerous part of it. You know what I mean? That's the part where you find out somebody gets hurt, or, you know, whatever it happens to be that freaks out the straights. That's the big problem. That's the big problem for everybody now, is when people who are not your audience get offended. I don't think your audience ever gets offended. You know, your audience could be like, that was a shitty show today. And that's it.
Well, that's one of the things I remember Opie and Anthony, when they moved to XM, I remember them saying, I don't know if it was on the air, but that the difference of being on WNEW was anybody could bump into you by accident and be offended. And that was fun. Whereas at XM, especially in the beginning, when they were not only on XM, but were on an additional pay channel, you had to pay to say, I want Opie and Anthony, that it was their hardcore listeners. And you were never going to run into an old lady who bumped into this station or somebody that you would offend. And they felt like they missed that part, being on satellite with just their fans.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. You know what I mean? There's nothing like doing that local scene. You know what I'm saying? There's nothing like being on in New York, because it is a tightrope back. Or it used to be back then. Nobody's doing it now, as far as I can see.
Yeah.
And it's because, you know, I guess from a corporate standpoint, it doesn't make the same kind of sense. And obviously, you're going to go from being funny to being obnoxious at some point, because the shock thing is the big problem of it. You know, the shock thing, it can't last.
Now, one of the things when I had been like a long time Howard Stern listener when I got to you guys in March of 2001. So I was already like 31, 32 years old. And being around you guys and seeing the way you did the radio show, I had never in my life considered that what you heard coming out of your speakers wasn't 100% real life. That never crossed my mind. And it made me rethink everything that I had listened to on Howard Stern for all those years. Was this real? Was this embellished? I had never run into that before. Had you guys been doing that sort of thing for a long time?
First of all, not only had we been doing it, it's the way the world works now. You know what I mean?
No clue.
First of all, you have to think the same thing if you're watching Fox or MSNBC, because they're trying to get people to come back the next day. If you're watching ESPN, do you really think they're that angry?
No more, but I did.
That happened. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's no way that somebody is going to give a shit if the Knicks drop a game in April. It doesn't make sense. And yet people are acting like they do care. So yeah. And plus, you know, I had a Carney background. Me and Fez were also very much into wrestling when we were kids.
Yes.
So we got the point that you're supposed to do this for an audience. You know what I mean? That has to there has to be story arcs all the time. Now, the weird thing is, because you do have, if you're going to do some of these things, even though you may be a work instead of a shoot, the work can turn into a shoot at any given time.
Yes.
That's the danger.
And the brilliance of it as well, right? So even though I knew the ball busting was part of the work, it would still piss you off and get a real reaction from somebody. Like, even though you knew we were doing trying to fill a 4-hour show, it would still get to the point where you were legitimately pissed off at what was going on.
Of course you were, especially if in the terms of that, the other person was getting your goat. You know what I mean?
Yes.
You can always cross the line. And you know, Billy Staples was great at that. I mean, he could annoy. Joe Poo could annoy. That was one of the reasons why they were there, is that they would look for weaknesses in their coworkers and exploit it. And I never knew a radio show where the producers didn't turn on each other or didn't look for a reason to out the other person on the air, whether it was our show or any show.
And that was the other thing. When I left NEW, I never felt like, after I left NEW, I never felt like I was in another place where someone was gunning for my job. And I always thought that was strange. Like at NEW, everyone was going for your job, right? So Rory was going to try to take my job, or Joe Pooh. And it was a legitimate thing where everyone sort of upped their game to try to impress the host, to get them, to give them more responsibilities on the show. And when I left NEW, it never happened again. Like no one was ever gunning for my job.
Because it wasn't real then. Jeremy wasn't going to allow that to happen. He wasn't going to allow a boxing match decide who was going to be producer.
But
that's
I also
insane.
It is insane. But I think back then, Jeremy and program directors like that wanted what the host wanted. And if the host wanted the decision to be made based on a boxing match, then that's what we were doing. But I don't think it would go on today. But I do think that was a reality then, that you could have gone down the hallway and go, Al lost a boxing match. He's no longer working here. And Jeremy would go, okay, well, we'll do the paperwork.
I think that just goes to show how lost you were in that whole thing. The fact that you still...
I'm still lost.
Yeah. Yeah. You never got it. That was one of the things, the wet behind the ears things that you were. And it was the thing that got to Jeremy about us. He used to call us the cruel circus, because he really got what we were doing more than even other hosts did. You know what I mean? He understood that this was like some kind of just a dark circus act from the Middle Ages, you know?
Well, I remember
like a kick out of it.
I used to annoy Opie on the air. Opie hated me, everything about it. But that was all based on, I felt like I was the puppet, right? And you guys were the puppet master. And I asked Anthony, did Opie know that I wasn't really that infatuated with him and all that stuff? He goes, no, he did not. He bought it 100%.
So here's the other part you don't know. You didn't fit in there anyway. You know what I mean? You were going to annoy a guy like Opie. You know what I mean? Like everything about you were like, because you were willing to run a dump button and shit like that. And you would also, rather than being funny, you would try to do, like, I'll never forget you saying that you shit standing up. And I thought that was...
wiped standing up, yeah.
I thought that, first of all, you didn't say it at the time. You said that you shit because you said that you would be standing and holding on to the top of the things. So if you're saying now it's just wipe, you're fucking working us. But at the time, that was the kind of shit that made everybody thought that you were fucking annoying, and you loved being annoying.
It was such a high when I was able to, like, the first time I did it, I think was when I said I was going to my cousin's wedding and I was going to give a $35 gift. Now in like New Jersey, you're giving $200 or, you know, and the people were pissed, the callers, we pay this much for the wedding thing. That felt so great to contribute that, but then it was like, then the show's over. What do you got for tomorrow? And that's the stuff that I couldn't wrap my head around, the amount of content that you had to create. And back then it wasn't even like put up on a podcast. So if somebody didn't hear it, that was it. That was your one shot of hearing it.
I would also say this, that's the beauty of it. Yeah. That kind of radio is sandcastles. So if you had a win, who gives a shit? If you had a loss, who cares? And then people would also remember it way better than it ever was. You know what I mean? Like, I have people still telling me that they remember these things that I don't remember happening that way all the time, Well,
I only was on the show for a year and a half. I guarantee fans of the show think I was there 5 years because of the amount of things that went on that were memorable in that year and a half.
Well, I mean, we weren't there, all that much more before you or after you. It was only a couple years, I think. And then we went to DC when NEW blew up. But, I do think that's the beauty. I mean, look at Earl was the same way. He did all these things, and it's not like that's not Earl what he did, but he also knew that he was aggravating people, and it's not as good as being funny, but it's the next best thing. And it's very, very wrestling, because if you're not the face, you got to be a heel, and you have to be a very good heel. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you have to
then,
fit in with the other characters of the show.
Of course. But you, like, in terms of Seinfeld, you were like Newman. You know what I mean? Now, I don't think the guys on Seinfeld hated Newman, but a big part of the audience hated him, you know?
Yeah, but I also think the thing with radio that's different from TVs and movies is that I don't know if it's because it's 4 hours a day, every day, and people generally now are using their real names, that you assume that more things coming out of your speaker are 100% real. So I think that people do think, or they do legitimately don't like you from what they hear coming out of the radio and do think you are that way. And then a part of you is that way. You know, it might be exaggerated a little bit, but you know, my stories were real. I did go to the bathroom and wipe myself standing up or go standing up. Like I did do those things, but it was fun to get a reaction from the audience knowing that that was a unique thing about you.
Yeah, but I also think that is true of whoever you talk to. To me, the show that you really have to watch out for is any show who goes, we're always going to tell you the truth. That's the biggest lie. And I don't give a shit if it's political or sports. That person is a goddamn liar when he says you're always going to get the straight thing from me. I've got it for you, because he's still selling. He's still selling entertainment.
But I would think like you and Fez would even only let in the minimal amount of people on what you were doing.
Well, most of the time, and this might be even hard for you to believe, is that we weren't discussing it. It was happening in the moment. You know what I mean? And sometimes the phones suck. So you're like, Billy, Al, get in here. What is it that you guys were arguing about? You know, you just try to get you're just trying to get anything going, you know? And like you said, 4 hours, you can't write that. You can't write 4 hours. So you're improvising. And if it works out that somebody says something ridiculous that they made out with their cousin or something, you're like, okay, we got the next hour, you know? Beautiful.
And for as long as I worked there, like people used to ask me, they'd be like, is Fez gay? Does Fez talk like that? I'm like, I don't know. And I work there every day. I don't have the answers. I don't know what is real and what is not real. It just blurs together, even for somebody in the mix of it.
This is the complicated thing about Fez. At the time you did that you were there, Fez thought he was playing a gay character.
Right.
And that went on his whole career. And then one day he decided, wait, you know, he was talking to a shrink and he was like, oh, I created the character that is me. and that really fucked him up. You know what I mean? Like that was falling through the whole fucking mirror for him. But this was a funny thing when I was doing the Ron and Ron show. And like I said, I would bring Fez in and we like immediately knew that, you know, Fez, because he talked that way. I mean, he took, you know, the Fez Whatley character is not that far ahead of him when he's just being his naturally funny self. He would sell it a little more. But if he was going to tell you a funny story as himself, it would not be that far away from the kind of voice that he uses, you know? So when he used to come on and the show, people would say, hey, is Fez gay? Is Fez gay to me all the time? And I go, I don't know. And then when it was Ron and Fez, people would say to me, hey, are you guys gay? And I'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about? You know what I mean? Like, hey, this all stopped being so fun.
Yeah.
So that was, you know, that was hilarious to both of us all the time. And then he would always play that up.
And I loved the built-in stories that went along with the various characters. Like the Fez had a girlfriend in Niagara Falls.
Ontario, Canada. Yeah.
Ontario, Canada. And then you would ask for a photo of her and he'd send you a picture. You'd say, this is the picture that comes with the wallet. Well, she's a wallet model. You know, it was like these built-in.
Right. And that was because, he had plenty of comfort with a guy hiding his sexuality when it turned out he was a guy hiding his sexuality.
So great. Let's call her up. She's a logger. I think she was also a logger, right? Let's call her. She's in the woods. She's logging.
And I will be honest, like, we never sat down and wrote that. That's all improv. He's so fast. And to me, when I think back over the entire time I've known him, which is like, I don't know, it's got to be close to 30 years probably, or something around that. That was the funniest, in my opinion, he's ever been, was NEW. I mean, he was just on fire and all the time.
And Fez had characters that would call in. You had characters that would call in. Actual caller listeners would call in as characters. It was, again, a mix. You didn't know, other than knowing in the studio, seeing you on the phone being Iris, Fez being Andre the Giant or Jan Brady. But then others would call. Like, there was a kid who called in the Jobber. I don't know if that was a real kid.
Yeah, that was a real kid.
Remember that kid?
What's going on? Yeah, what's going on, guys?
He always called to yell at me and like bully me or bully whoever was in the studio, and you knew it was a little kid.
Joe Jr. said that he was Joe Pooh's son, and he drank his own pee. Yeah. Kenny Allen was the kid that called. That kid was hysterical.
Now, was Kenny Allen your son?
Well, how could that be?
I don't know.
Wouldn't I know if it was?
Yes, you
son?
would know. That's what I am asking.
I will only say this: I think Kenny Allen was Joe Jr.
Joe
I think
Jr.
That's the thing.
You think he had multiple characters?
Yeah, I think it was the same kid. Now, here's the thing, Al. What difference does it make?
I need to know
why. That is what keeps you being as tight-assed as you are.
Well, because you do a show now with your daughter, and if Kenny Allen was your son, that's the fact that your family grew up doing this is awesome. Like, I loved the idea when I don't know where I heard this from, but when I heard Kenny Allen was your son, I was like, that is genius.
Yeah. Well, everything about it's genius.
He always wanted to be Kenny Allen always wanted to be a robot or pretend robots.
And then wouldn't let us. We would try to play with him, and he was telling us we were doing it the wrong way. Which, by the way,
like, where does that even come from?
I'm going to tell you something right.
Kenny Allen.
The thing is, Gail's daughter is very much, when you play with her, she tries to tell you what to say in the bit. She's always like, no. And then she will do a line read for you. She's 2.5. But, like I said, my kids grew up with me and Fez, and, we were joking all the time. Everybody, got it. And, I don't know, maybe it's like being a trapeze family or something.
Right. It's in your blood.
But you still not knowing after 20 years is hysterical.
Correct. And not knowing if the Jobber was your son. Who he could have been everybody. I don't know. He
could have been everybody. Who knows?
What's going on?
Here's the other thing. I think it's funny that you act like you didn't know that you were trying to annoy Opie when you broke the foosball table, which, by the way, wasn't even Opes. You know what I mean?
No, I did know I was being used in that way on the program. I did catch on to that. But yeah, and even the way you did I got drunk, accidentally made out with another man, and kicked over Anthony's foosball table.
Right.
After replacing that in the office, not on the air, back in the office, you go, no, it would be great. Pinball machine back there. It'd be awesome. All the guys would love it. You should try to get one. I go, oh, it's a great idea. So a guy is willing to give us a pinball machine and trade it out every few months. You sick and tired of the Rolling Stone pinball machine? We'll bring you the Kiss pinball machine.
Right.
So the guy brings it in, and on the air, of course, I say that I got the pinball machine. I bought it for Opie. So then he smashes it. It's a 1966 Rolling Stones pinball machine. It's now in pieces. And the guy calls me and says, did they really smash my... I go, yeah, it's in pieces. They've smashed your pinball machine. And it wasn't my pinball machine. And I didn't purchase it for Opie. But again, the whole thing happens. And now I'm in the now there's a smashed pinball machine. Now I owe this guy a pinball machine. Like, it was chaos. That place was chaos.
But here's the thing. You're in the middle of a classic bit. Why aren't you celebrating that?
I can celebrate. It's like I have this tape of when I was leaving the show and you guys had put together this tape. And on the thing, you say, I bet you, in a number of years, we're going to look back on this. He's going to really enjoy his work. And I can now. I can look back. It's 20 years. But at the moment, it was very stressful.
Well, thank God for that. You know what I mean? Thank God that you had a thing like that. Now you're able to handle every other part of your life.
Everything's simple now.
Yeah. But do you know the success, the people that have done our show, they're going off and doing other things? Yeah, because they know how to put together a show. They're not just getting coffee like a lot of producers. You ever see a lot of producers? You find out that they're making, dinner reservations or picking up clothes. I never did that to the producers. I'd had them get down on the ground and go down on a go-go dancer. That's the kind of thing that you need to learn how to do.
I also thought it was funny when we were there at NEW and we thought, we were really, getting our asses kicked being producers on the show. And then, one of your producers from Florida came up and it was like, these guys got it easy compared to what we were doing.
Oh, yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, that was
Flipper, I think, came up.
Yeah. I remember when we used to do that show, it was much more physical. There was much more physicality that took place. All this stuff would be seen as, as bad these days. So obviously people don't do it anymore. But at the time, that was the game. That's what everybody, had to do to be a part of it. And like I said, everybody went on and has done very well. Look at you. You're sitting there at the fan every day. You don't have to do anything. You're watching the show take place. I just see you acting like you're on the computer, but nothing happens.
No, just on Twitter.
You bring nothing to the show. You're zero help to them.
It does make me think, with your show, over the years, you change out producers a lot. And I actually think that's a good thing. Right? Like and I think about that, like, I wouldn't want my show to change me out, but I get why you would want to shake it up every couple of years and go, let's get a new person in here. Because each person, like, I thought that, and this wasn't at NEW, but I thought when Dave came on as your producer, that guy like took it then took like whatever I was doing and took that to another level where he did that to annoy the audience and physical stuff. Like
he's unbelievable.
He was unbelievable. Yeah.
And now he has a morning show in Jersey. Yes. I'm telling you, in terms of like, if we ever put together the list of producers all time, you're not even top 10. Al. I mean, exactly. You also did what I consider like the night that you decided to make out with that guy. And then you cried and laid in Mike Calta's arms. And I'll never forget that night because I'm like, I don't know guys like this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That was
I don't know this kind of softness. And I never knew anyone as sensitive as Mike Calta, who would sit there and hold on to you while you were sobbing
nice.
To him.
I did appreciate that. Yeah. And then we went to go see Bon Jovi, I think, the next day. He took me.
And then you're like, I'm like, you're worried that you look gay, and look what you're doing now. in your so-called straight life. You're lying in another person's arms, sobbing to him.
On the drinking shows, I think I actually talked myself into getting drunker quicker because they knew the minute I started drinking, I was no longer responsible for anything.
Everybody liked you. If you remember,
right?
Everybody liked you during those shows,
right? Because I would just trash everybody at work,
Yeah, you were great.
Opie and Anthony crew, management.
You suddenly weren't this tight ass. You were a lot of fun. There's this Danish movie right now called Another Round. You should be drinking every day. That's the thing. That's the real you. That's the you everybody likes.
Right. Yeah. Talkative, outgoing.
This other asexual, effeminate guy that you play, this strange Republican. You know what I mean? Like January 6th, I'm like, is that Al? There was about 6 different times where I thought I saw you running through the Capitol.
I was not. No, that was not me. I did not go through the Capitol.
Is this the only reason that you asked me to do this? You're like this whole thing of what is the truth? You're like an ex-girlfriend who wants to get back and talk to you after 20 years to find out what happened.
Right. What was it about me that ended the relationship? What was the show prep like for you and Fez before you got to us? Like, what did you and Fez, like when you would come in? I know you guys would take the train in together.
Yeah.
Would you guys talk prior to that, or would on the train would you guys throw around ideas of what types of topics? Or how did that? I know there was like Fez used to keep this list of kind of fun topics that were evergreen things that that weren't going on in the news. But if it was a slow day or whatever, but how did you guys decide what you were going to open with? To me, that's always like the big one, right? Like, what are you opening with, and how would you guys figure that out?
I don't really, because that evolves all the time over your career, whether it's a piece of news or whether it's a bit. And I remember when we decided to be very phone driven, we wanted to at first give out something that anybody would have an idea about. You know what I mean? Anybody would have an opinion and think they had the correct opinion. And then after that, we got more and more kind of sophisticated when we would start and write half a joke and ask them to finish it. And quite frankly, I thought that was some of the best shit ever because it was the most interactive stuff that we've probably ever done. And that audience was so funny and so brutal. And I know for a fact, some of those jokes showed up on some of those jokes from that showed up on different shows, whether it was television or radio or something else, that there were people that were running with that. And I guess it was almost like it was a prequel to Twitter in a way, where people do that kind of stuff now on Twitter. But there was just great nights of that.
Comedy really pyramids.
Yeah, the comedy pyramids where you're writing jokes and the audience is literally topping those jokes. And Fez could have been like a gag writer with Mel Brooks or something. I mean, he's that good. Also, so was Billy Staples. Billy Staples was the type of guy who you'd say, I need an idea, and he would write 100, and you would go, here's 99 shitty ideas, and this last one is funny, and he would go, great.
Right, that's what I wanted to ask you. Like, when Billy Staples was hired as a writer, what was his job? It was that, I guess, right?
Yeah, it was that. He never wrote jokes for me and Fez.
Not live, he wouldn't write jokes. Like Jackie the Joke Man would write live things for Howard. Billy would prepare stuff, like you said, like a list of things. And then you'd go through them and find one good one.
Yeah, and that would be normally show topics. Or the other funny part of it was bringing him in and reading off his shitty ideas and making him defend it, which he would 100%. You know what I mean? And that would always be really, really funny. I don't know how we came up with the bit where he wiped his ass with your paycheck, though.
Yeah.
But that was a work that turned into a shoot with you. You were insane.
Right. He wiped his, this was prior to direct deposit. And he wiped his poop on my check, which I have to obviously still cash.
Yeah, but that could have been a direct deposit. I mean, that could have been the new term for it, direct deposit. Wiping your ass with somebody else's check.
Yeah, I remember I think I cursed on the air because I remember that had to get beeped out. That's how furious I was.
But you knew he was going to do it, right?
I did know he was going to do it, yes. But just his attitude while he was doing it, I didn't care for that.
I know. That's what I'm trying to tell you. That's when you know that you're in the goddamn bit. That's when you know that it's working.
And then what happened with Joe Poo? So Joe Poo also came aboard. I feel like he was very young at the time. Like he was like
crazy.
20, 21 years old. So he would just call up and say, I eat my own poo. This was his thing.
And he would do it at the most inappropriate times. And it was always funny. And then we asked him to come down. All he was really doing, though, was kind of fighting with somebody on the air. One of the others. I heard from him, I don't know, several years ago.
Yeah.
I forget what it was. And he was like, I wish I would have went more with that opportunity. And I'm like, I think you took it as far as you could. You know
actually, I talked to him about a year ago.
Yeah.
And what's funny is I'm Facebook friends with him, and he will still I'll be like, happy birthday, Mom, 77. He'll write under it, I eat my own poo. I'm like, she doesn't want to hear that. She doesn't know what that means. He's still doing it on Facebook. I eat my own poo under people's things.
But did he? That's the real question. That's what we never figured out.
I felt like Joe Poo, when he came in to be a writer or an idea guy, I feel like he really struggled with that. And I don't know, what do you think happened there? Was he just too young, or was he? Well,
look, not everybody loves radio. You know what I mean? I fell into radio. Anthony fell into radio, but both of us ended up enjoying it. But a lot of people, I mean, the entire process is like what you were saying about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The entire process. I mean, I really think that the best shows are supposed to blow up. You know what I mean? The best shows are supposed to not last all that long. And if you look at that NEW lineup, everybody did, come apart at one point or another. Doesn't mean that everybody isn't out doing what they want to do now, but all the teams hit some kind of a wall.
I think with the Joe Poo thing, I think from what I saw of it, it felt like that you guys thought he was a very funny kid that wasn't pushing himself. So you guys would push him for him, hoping it would get him over some sort of hump.
I think that you're thinking back on this on a level that I don't really even remember that much.
I'm very reflective.
Yeah, but I mean, kids come and go. There's no doubt about it. You know what I mean? And the tough ones stick it out, and other people are just like, oh man, this is not worth the price. But to people like us, it always was worth the price. So people who think differently aren't in our tribe. You know what I mean? It's just a different way of doing stuff. That's all. Doesn't mean that anybody's wrong and anybody else is right. It's just like, well, this is the way, we're just going to keep on going.
When the company tried to do 92.3 Free FM and brought Opie and Anthony back and you guys back, the format was dead already, though, right? I feel like terrestrial radio was, as far as the talk format on terrestrial radio, was not in a good, you couldn't do what we did at NEW.
I would certainly disagree, because our last book there, we got a big bonus and everything. We were killing it, but I think that you need such a strong program director in that kind of thing that's able to have the conversations that we're having right now. You know what I mean? About, hey, go with it, don't go with it. Dude, drop it. Tomorrow you got to have something else, so don't feel so cocky. You really need somebody like that to explain things. And O&A were already in whatever their O&A problems were that they knew long before the rest of us knew. You know what I mean? And then they had a couple other shows on there that, they weren't kind of going to work in New York. They might have worked somewhere else. But I don't think that they had a management team who knew what to do, to know how to move stuff around. And you got to have the right guy there all the time.
Yeah. So then what led eventually to Fez deciding to retire from radio? Because you guys went to JFK after NEW, then to satellite radio, and you'd been doing shows for many, many, many years.
Yeah. Well, Fez has got a lot of, I mean, he just recently has, like in the past 2 weeks, had another massive heart attack where he died twice. He died and they had to get his heart started. They put him on a ventilator for a couple of days. And when they took him off the ventilator, his heart stopped again. So he's had a massive amount of health problems over the years. And, you know, part of it is he's got a weak ticker. It's just he got a shit heart from Jump Street, I guess.
Does he look back on his radio life as that was a great time and that was cool? And
100%.
He does.
Yeah, he loves it. And we talk about, you know, I mean, his memory is much better than mine, but, you know, he knows, look, nobody was doing a gay voice on the air. And when people tried to shame him, he handed them their ass time and time again. I mean, he did that voice in Redneck, Florida. When I started in Florida, I was getting anti-Semitic things because I was nasal. You know what I mean? Like, they were like, this guy must be a Jew from New York because he's neighbor. And all I did was try to learn some Yiddish terms that I would then start to drop in just to make him crazier. So when Fez came in and started doing the Fez voice, those rednecks went fucking crazy at first, but they all ended up loving him. Same thing when he came to New York. No one could believe it. And they all ended up loving him.
Did he feel a lot of pressure to do those Fezatorials every Friday?
He loves it, dude.
I know he loves it, but I would think like the pressure to like what is going to be the perfect topic that fits into the Fezatorial script.
Here's the thing. The difference, reason why you can't understand that is that you have zero talent. Fez has immense talent.
Oh, I see.
This thing of writing that and making people laugh was a driving factor in his life. And that's why, like you were talking about, if somebody came in and they were like, this is too hard, Fez wasn't going to be able to relate to that. You know what I mean? Of course, it'd be like if somebody on a football team telling you that it hurts to tackle people and they get exhausted running around and they'd like to sit down for a while.
Yeah, get a breather.
You're just going to say, this is not for you. You know, Fez loved that. Billy Staples loved that kind of stuff. My guys now, Chris Stanley, Vito, love it. Gail loves it. So that's the kind of people that you want in your life. Earl still doesn't get it after all these years. The thing that Earl is great at is being Earl. And that's what he brings to it. I always say in this thing that we do, you're either going to tell the joke or be the joke. It's up to you. It doesn't matter, but a joke is going to get done. You know,
and we need people to be the joke also. Like myself.
100%. Think to the guys that people hung out with in high school. One guy was going to be the butt of the jokes, right? Mm-hmm. One guy doesn't mean everybody doesn't love him because they appreciate that. Because they don't have to be that guy. He doesn't show up. Somebody else has to fall into that position. So yeah, you need all the colors in the rainbow to make the thing work out. But I had to tell you, Al, and I'm listening to you here, and you got to be one of the worst interviewers I've ever heard in my life because it's all just about you and your feelings.
Yeah,
and
how did I fit in?
Yeah, this is nothing about capturing what happened at NEW. Here's what I would do. I wouldn't air this episode. And I would delete the Anthony and then tell everyone else, I'm sorry.
It's not going to work out.
We've decided not to do it. I'm in the last midlife crisis of my entire life. Did you ever marry?
No, not yet. I do have a girlfriend of 6 years.
I don't believe you.
Still not married.
Where is she? Niagara Falls, Ontario, Canada?
That's right.
You're an asexual. Please put me on with her. I want to tell her nothing is going forward. Is she much younger than you, Al?
No, very similar age. She's like 2 years younger than me. So, yeah.
Well, she's thrown away any opportunity that there is for happiness.
Potentially. I was hoping the one thing I wanted to get out of this is who's Kenny Allen, and I'm still gonna end with this. Was still gonna I'm gonna walk away from this. Still no answers. Years later.
Yeah. Well, that's the beauty of it, right?
Do you like how at the NEW time, if we had Twitter and videos and Instagrams, would you have liked that, or would that have ruined it for you?
I will tell you, this is it's funny that you brought that up, because I remember being surprised that ronfez.net started at that time, right? And then I'm like, that's weird. People writing about the show. And what they think and who they think should be fired and who they think is good, who they think stinks. And then one night, I think I got a call, or maybe it was an email, and they go, hey, we're having a Ron and Fez get together at Hooters, and we would love for you to be there. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I decide when there's Ron and Fez get-togethers. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I've done this for a long time. I planned the big party. We put on a show, and it's, you sit down, you watch it, but it had changed. You know what I mean? It had changed where they were like, what we have in common is that we listen to a show and then we go and talk and we do stuff too. And we meet each other and we have sex or whatever we do. And I'm like, okay, you got to roll with this. You know what I mean? Like, that changed. And then Twitter, of course, changed stuff, and Instagram changes stuff. But I remember, like, when we in Florida and we did we would do a gig, we wouldn't know who was going to show up. You know what I mean? We weren't selling tickets. So we'd say, we'll be at this thing, and everybody would show up, and they wouldn't know each other. They would stand next to each other. But once the websites started and the boards started, they would talk to each other and start to plan their own things. And it in my opinion, it changed everything a lot, because it kind of meant like the problem I have with like any of that stuff is now the show isn't over. You know what I mean? You're talking about writing a Fezatorial. People expect somebody to write a funny tweet, do a funny Instagram. You know what I mean? And you're like, but this isn't even the show.
Or they'd want the Fezatorial immediately after it aired to be on a video on social media. Where's 100%. The Fezatorial?
Yeah. And that, and of course, life goes on, technology goes on, but it did take away from radio itself. Radio stopped being the friend, and the friend is now the telephone, and radio is on the telephone, Yeah,
I also liked not knowing what the radio host looked like, and the studio was always a mystery to me. Like, if 60 Minutes ever did a piece on a radio person, you could peek in and be like, what does their studio look like? Now everything is just out there.
Right. And I remember when the studios were always on the outside of town. You know what I mean? Like, JFK had Howard and, Don and Mike, and it was a big, big radios. And I went there and I'm like, this is a shit box. You know what I mean? It's in Fairfax, Virginia. They haven't updated their stuff, nothing. And that's how radio stations used to be. They used to be on the outside of town, and now it's supposed to look like, Facebook or some shit.
And what's the biggest difference for you now with satellite versus what NEW was? Like, what are the things that you see as the big difference?
Well, everything, of course, is different because you can't shock anymore. And now everybody has a podcast. You know what I mean? Like, your listeners have podcasts. Your guests have podcasts. You know what I mean? Everybody has one. Ball players have podcasts. Actors have podcasts. And they all pretend that they're doing radio, and they go, I always wanted to do radio. I go, this isn't radio. Even I'm not doing radio and satellite. I'm doing something different than radio. Do you feel like you're still doing radio today in sports radio?
I guess, but it feels different in that I feel like there's so many less shared experiences now. Like, the audience is so broken up. So the amount of people listening to radio now versus during the NEW time, I think, has shrunk a lot, and people are just spread out everywhere now. So it's not like everybody's not hearing like Mike and the Mad Dog. That was a thing everybody listened to if you were into sports.
Right.
And now being into sports, your interests can now be spread over so many different things that you're just listening to. So it feels weird. It does feel weird.
I think it's always funny too with sports is like, it's always football season now. It's constant football talk. And I'm like, I really don't care. I don't care who gets traded. I'm gonna pay attention to my team when we go rolling back in September. I don't want to think about it during April.
Yeah, it never ends. The season goes on forever. And that happened with like the NFL channel on Sirius, the MLB channel. They just do it year round. And where did the Sias come from? Where you would go,
that was the old Ron and Ron show. That was just like a thing that took off. And, like everything else, it gets more embarrassing every year. You know what I mean? You're like, yeah, I don't know. We used to say see you like that. I don't know why.
I used to like sometimes, I forget the NEW show. We would go off at 11 or 10. I think maybe at 11 it would end. And it's starting at 10 o'clock. People were calling up. I just want to do a see ya. We still got an hour left of the show to go.
Yeah. I just want to say see it to everybody.
I thought the see ya's worked great during comedy pyramids. Where people would give their thing out. They go, so. Was like the way they would punctuate their line.
Right.
Or something. So now you do the Bennington show with Gail, your daughter Gail.
Mm-hmm.
When did she first seem like she was interested in doing radio?
She was always 2 feet away from us most of our entire life, when me and Fez. And we'd take shows out on the road. Even as a little kid, she'd be going along with us. And any of conversations. Fez used to come over the house all the time. I'd go to bed and him and my kids would sit up watching TV and having fun. So she's always been around it. It's just as natural as anything else.
I like it. Do you think Fez would do something like this?
Well,
sit
right
down
now
and discuss.
Yeah, I see. Here's the thing. I'll be honest. I mean, I would bring it up to him, but you've aggravated me, and he could end up dying while he screams at you. You don't know what you're talking about,
right?
You know what I mean? Like,
I feel like I made Fez. I think Fez has been mad at me for a while because there was something that you guys were doing in studio on satellite where
you know what it was, Al?
What?
It was a 9/11. We were getting everybody back together in a 9/11. And you acted like,
you're right.
Fuck you guys.
No, it wasn't like that. But you're right. I said, no, I can't come in studio. That would be against my policies.
Right. And here's the thing. Wow. It's almost like you said it to the victims of 9/11, not so much to us.
I thought it was something much not as serious. But now that you say that, that does make sense.
Yeah.
All right. I understand now.
You should have understood anyway.
I should have. But yeah, I remember saying, well, I could call, but I can't come in. I think the company would not like that.
I'm going to tell you again. This is not an interview this is about you.
Yeah.
And who you think doesn't like you and why you can't commit to your girlfriend.
Right.
And quite frankly, I mean, I would expect this out of a much younger man.
Yeah.
But this is needy and it seems like it's going on forever.
I'm 52. I'll be 52 this year. That's old.
No one gives a fuck, Al.
Oh, again.
You're just a fucking crazy old man who I wouldn't be surprised if there's a blow-up doll sitting in that fucking Woodbridge apartment with you.
I've moved since Woodbridge, yeah. I'm down the Jersey Shore now.
Where?
Bradley Beach by Asbury Park. It's like a next town over.
Are you right on the beach? You
I
looking
am.
at the ocean? Okay.
It's a very tiny
well,
home.
Everything about you has been, I'm going to come down and I'm going to bring drugs and I'm going to bring bikers and we're going to finally fucking make you an adult. That's what we're going to do.
It's too late.
No, this is going to be the coming of age summer. It's white boy summer for Al Dukes. I'm going to get a hold of Anthony. I'm going to get a hold of the Volpe, Don and Mike. I'm going to get the radio chick in here and everybody's going to get together and sacrifice you.
All of the sports guys. Hopefully you could get a couple of those guys.
Spots guys. Al, this can't go on all night.
No, we are good.
Nothing Nothing came out of this.
This has been perfect.
Look, please, to everybody else who worked at NEW, do not do this show. I can't tell you how aggravated I am now and how this just had to do with Al.
Yeah.
And nothing else.
Well, that's why I need to talk to Fez as well. I must apologize for the 9/11 thing and then also see how else I could learn about myself by talking to Fez.
I'm telling you right now, you will kill him. You will literally kill him.
I do not want to do that. So maybe after he feels better.
Why? How long is this fucking NEW look back at your life going to go? Nobody ever wants to go to a high school reunion.
Yeah.
Because we run into people like you who suddenly get bold as the years go along. Like, hey guys, why did everybody used to pull my shorts down in front of the girl? You know, we're like, I don't fucking know.
Right. Well, I'm just been looking back this year. So it's just a look back for me. So thank you for looking back with me. This has been terrific.
Can I tell you something?
Yes.
I'm going to, as soon as I hang up with you, I'm going to call my lawyer. And if this runs, I will sue you and I will sue you. Who's the carrier here? What is this on?
We're a new company now, Odyssey.
We're going to sue Odyssey.
Change their name to Odyssey.
Odyssey, you ought to see what we're doing this year. You ought to see it. Okay, Al.
We do again. See is at the end?
Yeah, you do the first one.
All right. So,
you ready?
Yeah. Hello? So, Jim, I know you first became aware of Opie and Anthony. I guess when you were a guest, you went up there with Dice. Is that how you first met Opie and Anthony?
Well, I first became aware of them. I was opening for Dice. I was touring with him. And Club Soda Kenny told me, he goes like, yeah, these guys were making fun of Andrew. And I was like, oh, what dicks. Like, I didn't like them because I was like, they're making fun of my friend. And I wound up listening to, I think it was some O&A clips somewhere. And I really laughed. I think Anthony was doing his Dice impression and it really made me laugh. So then Dice started going on the show and he developed a relationship with them. But I didn't meet them for a little while in there. Dice called one time. Dice was such a good friend to me. He was, I think, in studio and he goes, you got to talk to my opener. Or he was on the phone. So they called me on three-way and I was talking to Andrew and Open Ant my first time on the radio show. And I was really awful. I was kind of, I suck as a phone guest. So I was but they were polite to me because they were still not syndicated and they still kind of had like low self-esteem. So they weren't the O&A they would become where they would have just hung up on me and told me I stink, which lucky for me, they were still a little shy about pissing off Dice. But yeah, it was a phoner. It was my first encounter with them.
Well, I feel like Dice was one of the very first people that went from being a Howard Stern guest to an Opie and Anthony guest. Like that, he was one of the first guys I feel like was a big name that started going on their show.
Yeah, and it was way before. It was literally when they were only on in New York. I do believe it was. I actually don't remember exactly when he started going on, but yeah, I don't think a whole lot of Howard guys jumped over that I can remember. I know Brian Regan would go on a lot. Mario Cantone, Lewis Black.
And those were not Howard guys back then,
right? Not Howard guys. I can't think of anyone. Plus, Howard was still on terrestrial across the street in the morning. But yeah, I think back then there was the whole thing, like if you do O&A, Howard's not going to let you back on. Yeah. So that was at least the impression we had.
And were you a fan of talk radio, either Imus or Stern or anything else like that? Imus.
Because my dad listened to Imus. Like I didn't listen to Howard. All the comedians I knew, they all listened to Howard. But I was never up in the morning. Like when I started doing stand-up in 1990, I'm going to bed at 4 or 5 in the morning, waking up at 3 to go do gigs. So I didn't listen to morning radio. So the only morning radio I ever had any experience with was Imus because my father would listen to him. And I was friends with a kid named Greg Fioravanti and his father. I don't know exactly what he did, but he was in the business somehow. And he had some connection to Imus. And I just don't remember what it was.
And then you said you were a terrible phone guest. What was it like the first time you went into Opie and Anthony? Was that also with Dice, or did you go in separate?
It was with Dice, and it was a really weird thing. Like, I've never been greedy about like, I got to get the money. It was always about like, use this moment to do something that will help you or that is fun. And I'm saying that because I went in, I think Jericho, Chris Jericho was doing this, McQuaid. I forget the character he was doing back then, but it was like this guy, he wouldn't acknowledge that he was Jericho. It might've been my first time with him. And I was there with Dice, and I wasn't saying much. If I remember, Moon Juice McQuaid might have been the character he was doing. So I was not saying much because it was my first time on, and I had to leave for a gig in Jersey, but I'm like, I hadn't done much. And I'm like, what are you doing? Be late for the gig. Fuck the gig. Get somebody else to do it. You're on afternoon radio in New York with Dice. What are you, stupid, for what, a few $100? So I wound up canceling the gig, I think. And in that final hour I stayed on, I was funny. And I was really funny. And I think Oprah was the one who was like, dude, you got to come back on. You're really good. But had I just left and done that gig, it would have been a very uneventful first in-studio appearance. And I might not have ever been invited back on separately. So I think Opie eventually told me like, hey man, even if Dice isn't here, we'd love to have you in because you're a local guy. So that weird little decision, it's crazy how these little decisions gently nudge the course that your life heads on. And that was one of those little weird decisions that kind of nudged me into a direction of where the radio show is going to be something in my life.
And then how long after that first appearance where you were in studio did they have you back in?
8 years. No, I'm kidding. It was, you know what? I don't remember. I just started coming in occasionally, and I really don't remember it because it's, again, it's 20 years ago now. So it's just kind of I would just kind of come in, or I think Opie and I were definitely friends before Ant and I were. So he and I would talk once in a while, and he'd, hey man, just come in. And we got this thing happening. Like I was kind of fast on my feet. So they liked when like something was happening and I could just fire in jokes. And then eventually Opie said, just do kind of whenever you want to pop in, just let me know and come in. And then Lewis and I got arrested on the Voyeur bus. And once we got arrested, went to jail for the night. I got carte blanche on the show. That was what Opie said to me, dude, anytime you want to come in, you're welcome. You have carte blanche. You don't have to ask. You can just come. And this was before I was getting paid. But that Lewis Black, again, that horrible night when we went to jail for the Voyeur bus, that's kind of cemented me that I had this weird iconic moment in the show's history. And I had kind of carte blanche to come on whenever I wanted. And I think that was before we were syndicated too, or before they were syndicated. It wasn't a we yet. It was still a they. Now,
the Voyeur bus, that was not an Opie and Anthony. They didn't put that together, right? That was some guy who just had a see-through bus there where women were showering and he was driving it around New York City. That guy just was looking for publicity and hooked up with Opie and Anthony to get you guys involved in that?
Came in as a guest. He brought some hot girls, topless, sexy girls. And hey, we're doing this thing for the Voyeur bus. And that was another one where I had a gig. I had to be down in South Jersey for a gig. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? I'll go on the bus. I'll be back by a certain time. I can be out by 7. I'll be there by 8. I remember thinking that. So they sent Lewis Black and I on the bus with Rick Delgado and Ben and a couple of other people, I think, went on just to kind of call in. I think that was, I don't remember. I know Rick was there. And just to kind of call in and give progress on the bus's trip through New York. It was like December 15th or 16th. It was like Christmas rush hour. And as we're on this bus, like kind of reporting what's going on, we're calling back in. I mean, there are hundreds of people following this bus. The cops are actually escorting us so people don't get too close to the bus. And then at one point downtown, CNN jumped on the bus and they did a quick story on this thing. And then they went and reported it to City Hall. So by the time we came back up under Lower Manhattan and looped up 6th Avenue, we eventually got arrested at 6th. And I want to say in the 50s somewhere. And that's when I kind of knew I wasn't going to make my gig. But and Opie and Anthony stayed late into Ron and Fez's show. And it was a huge story because, the show was so big back then. But that kind of, it was not an Opie and Anthony thing. We stupidly hung on. And Lewis and I both smoked. And I remember Lewis and I were talking to the cop who had us locked up. And we're like, can we be in the cell together? And he goes, what do you guys think? You're going to protect each other? And I'm like, yeah, you're right. I mean, if Lewis was being sodomized, I just would have looked out the thing. I probably would have done lookout for the guys doing it if they asked me to.
And when you said you felt like you had carte blanche after that, it's weird when someone says, hey, anytime you want to come on, give us a call. Did you feel weird asking, or did you just at that point feel like, yeah, if I want to come in, I'll come in. I don't care how often it is.
You know, I try to never overstay my welcome.
Yeah.
So I was always a little bit, I would err on the side of caution. And then a couple times there was one time there was this crazy, sexy stripper in, and they're like, this is Jim Norton's dream girl. So they were actually, Jim, if you're listening, come in right now. We got a girl for you. And I came in and we had a fun time. So I think I just got comfortable with the idea that if I showed up, these guys kind of liked me, and I would hang out with them after, and we would go out. And again, I don't remember the exact time frame. My memory is going out, as I get older. But I remember one time, and again, Anthony and I were friendly on the air, but he had a girlfriend back then, so I didn't really hang out with Ant. So Opie and I would talk a lot more. And he said to me, dude, we're going to get you paid one day. We're going to get you some money. Keep coming in. You're really funny. And this was like, we would go do these live listener events. And, I think we had done like something at Hooters or whatever, which was right downstairs from NEW, as you remember. And behind it, I think on 56th Street or something. So he told me, we're going to get you paid sooner or later. We're going to get you paid sooner or later. So I kept coming in, and eventually they did. They got me hired. I remember I was making $1,000 a week, which, it was pretty fucking good for a first time hire, of just to kind of come in and do radio. And I don't know if we had been syndicated or not. We maybe just got syndicated at that point. But we had another weird moment where a guy called up from Philly. It was like new in syndication, and he was suicidal. So we were talking to him about, trying to talk him out of killing himself. And that got some press in Philly early for the show, like when we had just gone on in the afternoons there. So we had these weird moments in the show's history that I was involved in, which kind of, I think, helped me get on the payroll.
Now, before you were even getting paid, was it making sense for you to do it even if it was free because it was translating into more money for your stand-up gigs, or you were getting bigger crowds because of it?
100%. I mean, the money is always great, but I never, even long into our tenure, even long after NEW and into XM, when Open Ant were like, or they announced O&A's big contract, I never asked what they were making. I never negotiated hard for money. I always took what was offered. I've never been fucked up about money like that. Like, I've never been greedy. So no, for me, it was always just, man, I got people showing up to gigs. I got people who want to come see me. I got people like calling in about my jokes. Like, so just the fact that I was getting some recognition was what I wanted. And even long into my Opie and Anthony relationship, I never, and I had the same agent as they did after a while, Bob Eatman, and I never said, what are they getting? Like, I truly never knew what Opie and Anthony made. Never. I never asked. I never gave a shit. Whatever they got, they deserved. It was never about me going, hey guys, because they discovered me. Like, I understood that too. It was never like, hey man, I'm an equal in this. And they would say to me occasionally, both of those guys said, dude, we understand that this is kind of like a triangle now, but the branding is Opie and like, and I was always like, great. I never ever pushed back on that or wanted more than that. I always thought they were super, super generous with me. And so money was never an issue.
Did Opie and Anthony come to you as a pair, or was it just Opie who said?
It was Opie, 100% Opie. For the money?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then when he made that happen, it was a 5-day-a-week thing then, or still not even 5 days a week?
That's a good question. I don't remember. I think I was coming in 3 days a week at one point. I think I had been coming in 3 days a week. And this is what an unobservant ass I am. At one point, those guys were not getting along at all. And I didn't even know it. So I would come in and I would always have a great time with them. Anthony would be drinking, putting his thing behind putting his beer behind the console on the left side. And again, I was closer to Opie at that point, but I didn't realize that, Opie was kind of talking to me more than Ant on the air, or they were kind of, at times I was like relieving the tension between them. And I had no idea that was happening. I didn't realize that I was just one more person to kind of comfortably bounce things off of in the studio. I had no idea until years later. I mean, so I would love to say I'm this master of observation, but I didn't. But I think that I kind of served a purpose there that I just wasn't aware of.
Yeah, when I talked to Anthony for this podcast, he said that he didn't think that the show needed a third guy.
Yeah.
And that he didn't know at that time that Opie felt like they were already losing chemistry. So Opie wanted to get another person in. With that being said, like with a third guy coming in and Anthony initially not wanting a third guy, I always found it odd that you guys never seemed at odds, you and Anthony. Like you guys got along so great on the air. I would think that if I was in Anthony's position, I'd be like, why is this guy coming in and taking some of the jokes, but that never happened with you guys.
No, never. And Anthony is very good. And this will come from his traumatic childhood and really at compartmentalizing and focusing on one thing. It's what happens when spaghetti is being thrown against the wall. You learn to compartmentalize. And Anthony is also a guy who's he's comedically so brilliant. And he's so good on the radio that I'm funny. And I'm very quick with my joke, but there's nothing I'm going to do that's going to put Anthony Cumia out of a joke. Like, like the Opie and Anthony show, I was never a threat to anything on that show. So I think even though he might have felt it was weird, he on some level has to know that he's so goddamn good at this that I'm not coming in and doing the same thing. I'm just firing out kind of one-liners and talking about my own sexual inadequacies and making fun of myself. So I think that he knew he was as good as he is. So I was never a threat to anything anybody was doing on that show.
Anthony said one of the main things that you brought to the show to him was that you would acknowledge a one-liner that went nowhere, that bombed. And he said before you had gotten there that if a line was said and it didn't work, it was just like, we'll keep plowing on, move on, cover it up before people realize you had a joke that didn't work. And that you would like go out of your way to acknowledge that was a terrible line that went nowhere.
Yeah, again, that just comes from hanging out with the comedians I hung out with, and that's how we interacted with each other. You couldn't get away with it without being made, and it doesn't mean every time you have to be taken to. It was just fun to make fun of somebody who shit the bed with a joke, and it made something funny that bombed. It was a way to salvage something, and it also I felt brought a level of honesty to me as a comedian. So that's kind of what I did. But again, that was all of us. It was Patrice and Colin and Voss and Bobby. And that's how we interacted with each other. So it was just a natural extension on the air to acknowledge, or Otto, another guy who would acknowledge when things weren't going well. So I think I probably just did it on the air by shitting on myself at first. I mean, I don't think I would have shit on one of those guys initially. So it was probably just me making fun of myself for a joke sucking.
Yeah, growing up, I was a huge Howard Stern fan. And at the time, I thought, wow, like this guy is so super honest about everything. He will acknowledge he has a small penis. He talks about masturbating, like all this stuff. And then I feel like you took it to a whole nother level where you had no shame in any, like, what someone might be embarrassed about sexually, or, just there just seemed to be nothing that would embarrass you about yourself. Yeah. And that was really refreshing to hear on the radio. Like, it was just a whole nother level from Howard Stern, small penis. It takes me 2 seconds to have sex. Like, you would just talk about your lifestyle and things that I think people would hide in the dark. And it was just refreshing to hear on the radio that we all kind of have some things that we kind of hide about ourselves. And I felt like it was so you would just let it out there. I was like, man, like if this guy's looking for a girlfriend, she knows everything that she might be turned off by before she would even get involved.
Well, thank you for saying that. It's a nice compliment. But yes, it's the truth in a way. Like, there's a line in Full Metal Jacket where he says, we're here to weed out all non-hackers who do not pack the gear to serve in my beloved corps. And that's what doing the radio show would do. Like, anybody who stepped into it, there was so much of my stuff out there that 80% of the women who might have been inclined to go out with me just backed out and went, nah, he's done golden showers. I don't want to. But the ones that did show up were really good eggs. And I think I did it because it felt like it was mine. Like, when you're making fun of things that are yours, like, I felt like I had free reign to make fun of anything because I was so cruel to myself first and foremost. And it felt very truthful because I knew all that stuff wasn't true, but I was taking like a distorted perception of myself and just letting everybody hear what I said to myself. You know what I mean? It was almost like, yeah, I know technically I'm not a piece of garbage, but I do in my life feel like it. So I might as well say it out loud. Like, I know all these things. sexual inadequacy or paying for sex, for years. Just talk about it, because it was stuff that brought me a lot of deep shame. And the only way to kind of exercise it is to air it out. It was the only way to give, and then have other people go, God damn, I do the same thing. Those are the best emails I get. Even to this day, people are like, dude, I always thought I was weird for doing this, but you made me feel okay about it. Like, that's a great compliment when somebody tells me that. So yeah, it just made me feel like, if I'm going to make fun of you, then I really should be truthful enough to make fun of myself and to humiliate myself a little bit, because who am I to sit there and judge you if I haven't been honest about myself?
I remember, and still to this day, whenever I hear Joe Beningo's name, I remember a story you told on the air about how you would be looking for prostitutes while listening to Joe Beningo
on the overnights. I love them. 240 on the fan. The Jets, they can't win a ball game. And he's screaming about that. And I'm negotiating rates, and I'm pissing into a dude. I had a cup I would drive around. I'd pee in a cup and dump it out the window, so I didn't have to get out and pee. It was hours every night, because this was after O&A got fired, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Wait, or you know what? It might have been.
I feel like it was before that.
It might be, because we were in afternoons back then. So yes, I didn't really do that when we were in the morning. I couldn't, but it was, it was in the afternoons. And then I was doing Tough Crowd once we got fired. So yeah, correct. That was while we were still on the air, because it was, I didn't have to get up until, for 3:00 radio show. So yeah, I just had hours to kill, man. And I loved Beningo. And then occasionally, what's his name? Steve Summers? Is that the guy schmoozing under the covers? Yeah. With Imus in the morning. He would always plug Imus. Yeah, I used to listen to come back from gigs before even Opie and Anthony. I was a big, Jay Diamond.
Yes.
I used to listen to the Jay Diamond and the Bob Grant replay overnight. Like, I think Jay Diamond, I want to say, was on 11 to 2 or 3 or midnight to 3. And then Bob Grant would replay, his afternoon show would replay overnight. So that's what I would listen to before O&A.
And I asked Anthony, and he said that it was the Tough Crowd came after the O&A show.
It did,
because it was all those same, and I didn't know any of those comedians until Opie and Anthony. And I felt like I was like a fan of stand-up, because I knew, Gary Shandling and the really big names. And then there was this group of guys that would come in with you and Opie and Anthony that were sort of like these. I would see them then as, these are New York comics that I'm not aware of, because I'm not going to clubs in New York. But it was like a very specific, close group. And then Tough Crowd, that was, a show that you feel like, of course, wouldn't air anymore today. But
right,
it took that part of the Opie and Anthony show and moved it to TV. And I just thought that was such a great show. Why did that get canceled? Was it in the beginning of the, canceling things that make fun of race and that sort of thing?
I think that the ideology went into it. I remember, and I'm such a good coattail rider, Al. It's amazing. Opie and Anthony ended in August of 2002. November of 2002 is when we really, I shot, I think the first 6 episodes of Tough Crowd were shot. So we started conceptualizing that right at, and then it went on the air in early 2003. Tough Crowd went off the air at the end of 2000, I think it was 4 or early 2005, and then early 2004, and then Opie and Anthony were back on the air like a month later. Like, it was like puddle jumping from Opie and Anthony to Tough Crowd back to Opie and Anthony. It couldn't have worked out better for like a person like me who just loves to grab onto a coattail and get dragged over rocks. But it really was the New York kind of everybody just kind of attacking each other, and we did it on the air, and then it worked on Tough Crowd, and then we brought it back when O&A were on Sirius or XM at the time. And I remember me and Patrice were sitting in a car. I dropped him off one night. We were just sitting there talking about the Opie and Anthony show. This is probably 2003 or 4 when O&A were not on the air. And he was like, no other show lets you do what those guys do. Just sit there and make fun of each other for hours. He's like, no one else lets you do that. Like, we were just talking about how much we missed what that show let you do. So yeah, I never thought it would come back either. I remember feeling helpless and hopeless that it would never come back. And of course, lo and behold, it did.
Were you responsible for bringing comics on Opie and Anthony?
No, I mean, those guys did bring guys on before me, Voss.
But how did they know them? We know how they became aware of you through Dice. Didn't they become aware of guys like Voss and Patrice through you?
No, Voss, had gone on just kind of through his own, I think. And he brought Patrice on before I did. I think Patrice's first time on the radio was with Voss. My influence with the comedians was once I became a kind of a semi-regular fixture, they liked the comic coming on all the time element, and I would be able to push for guys I liked, Bobby Kelly, Bill Burr, who didn't come in. This is again XM days. He didn't come in with me the first time. He came in to promote Chappelle's show, I think, or the Charlie Murphy tour he was doing with Donnell Rawlings. I think he came on the first time with Donnell Rawlings and Charlie Murphy. And but I would push for guys like that. But that was at XM. My influence was basically just saying, hey, this guy's really funny, or that guy's really funny, or just interacting with comedians a certain way when they came on the air. But those guys were bringing in comedians, in fairness. I mean, they liked comedians. Like Mario Cantone was going on, Brian Regan was going on. They had comics before me.
Now, you mentioned, we talked earlier about being super honest, and it's one thing I think to do it in a comedy club, but when you do it on WNEW, how did your family react to those sorts of things?
Well, my first phone-in, the first time I talked on the radio, I was talking about golden showers and, my girlfriend and the things we would do. And my father and I talked. He's like, so your mother and I heard you on the radio yesterday. And I was like, good. And he goes, yeah, I told her you're just kidding. And I'm like, yep. Yes, I am, Dad. And we both knew that I wasn't kidding, but we both knew this is how this has to play out in the family. Right. Like, all right, fine, Dad. I never drank it out of a cup. You're right. I made it up for the radio. And the girl I was dating, her family, she was so embarrassed. But I'm like, did they know who I was talking about? And she's like, no, they didn't. So, I think that kind of, it hurt my relationship with her, even as a friend, because I think everyone listened to Opie and Anthony and they had heard that and they might have connected it to her. So I always tried to spare people's personal lives. Like I never outed people by name. I lied all the time about dates and experiences and when something happened. And I lied about context. There was always lies I would tell simply to separate somebody from being identifiable. So, I've been very honest on the air, but I've mixed in that honesty with a tremendous amount of lies about locations and dates and circumstances. But that was basically to keep people's private lives private. Like I didn't want, if I said, hey, a girlfriend and I did something, or if I did this with an escort one time, it might've been with a girlfriend 2 weeks ago, but I said I did it with an escort 3 years ago because I don't want anybody connecting. Like it's my dirt shouldn't embarrass other people.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yes. On NEW, it was much different, I think, than being on satellite, especially on XM. When you guys first got there, it was not only a pay service, but it was an additional payment to be
$2. Yeah.
$2 more. So I think one of the things that Anthony had said prior was that in that situation, the only people listening are your hardcore fans.
Yeah.
Where at a place like NEW, when it's on the regular radio, there's a chance that somebody bumps into that show who's a grandmother, who's a church-going father. You're gonna be able to catch people off guard more there, and like you're saying, family members of girlfriends that you're dating at the time. Did you notice a big difference in that in the years since NEW?
You did, especially in the beginning. I think when we first went back on, we had 11,000 listeners. That's how small it was when we first went back on, because XM was XM. You have to buy the unit, put it in the car. We fought for a couple of years to get off that higher tier. We fought for a while to get off that. And then once we were exposed on XM, as far as anybody could tune in and listen, it became a little bit easier to gain new listeners and, like you said, catch people off guard. But we always had real language freedom because, again, it's a pay service. So, even all the crazy things we said, look, if you're going to get mad at us, you better get mad at The Sopranos, who said a lot worse than we did. They said that on HBO, which is a subscription service. You're paying for that. You're saying, I want this. And that's how it was with our show. So we said a lot of horrible things, but people were paying for it in an additional service. So if people aren't going to give shit to television shows and HBO series, then I don't want to hear it either. Do you know what I mean? Like, so That kind of gave us a different free reign than we had on NEW. Because I looked at NEW, even though we had leeway way more than you have today, that's much more like regular television compared to HBO.
Right. And when you were at NEW, did you do any prep yourself, or did you show up and react to everything that was going on? Like, would you ever go in and go, hey, I want to talk about this particular topic, or did you just assume it would get around to that?
I still don't do prep. Are you kidding me? I know I like to react. I think that's why O&A works so well. Because those guys, we had a bigger staff, and they would do prep work and discuss topics. And I would just react. I like just reacting. I prefer to react. And Anthony and I worked so well together because we were like kind of two kids shooting spitballs and reacting. And it was like this crazy, almost like a food fight where you didn't know exactly what was getting thrown or where or what angle it was coming. There was just a lot of different energy being fired around. And I work well in that environment. Like, I like an environment where you can just kind of react and then hang back if you want to, and then react and then hang back. Like, I kind of like to do that. So that was a really, that was one of the best things about my chemistry with him, is that, the way we would kind of both react to things. I thought we played off each other pretty well.
And nowadays, to me, and maybe it's because there's a lot of podcasts and everything is sort of on demand or on YouTube, 4 hours a day seems insane to be looking to fill 4 hours a day every day with fresh content. That was one of the things, like with Opie and Anthony on NEW, is like every day you had to try to top what you did the day before. And it was inevitable that show was going to blow itself up.
Sure. Eventually. Yes. I mean, it's 20 hours a week. I mean, and on, on satellite, it became 25 hours a week at one point when we were doing the extra hour. We were doing 6 to 9 and then 9 to 11 on pure satellite. But yeah, I mean, eventually it blew itself up because, I mean, it really shouldn't have been kicked off the air for what it was. In fairness, the show did a lot of crazy things, but that was a sponsored contest that the company signed off on. So there should have been a suspension there. Sex for 3
years.
For 3 years. Yeah. So that should have been a suspension, and just ride it out, and something else would have happened and come up, and an apology and blah, blah, blah. It would have survived. So that was a real panic move. It was a terrible move for them to pull that show off the air. But maybe they were just sick and tired of O&A by then. That could have been it as well. Like, they could have just had enough of the potential disasters. I really don't know. But that was a really a bad decision, and the company never should have done it. It was a bad move by NEW. And by the way, I had just gotten my salary doubled. I
knew there was something with your contract right around that time.
Dude, I had just gotten doubled. They had jumped me up to a little over 100 a year, and the paperwork hadn't been signed yet. So then we get fired, and O&A were under contract where they got paid. With me, I was there at the pleasure of Opie and Anthony, so they didn't have to pay me. So CBS was kind of fair with me, or whoever it was at the time. They paid me for like 6 months, and they didn't have to, but I guess that they liked me, and I had goodwill with the company. So they did send me a check for like 6 months, but it was based on my first salary and not my new salary, which was infuriating. And they allowed me on other stations.
Oh, that was good.
Yeah, because Opie and Anthony had like you have to just sit out and get paid. But with me, they said, look, if you want to promote gigs, go ahead. Just don't talk about the mess. And I didn't. But so in fairness, CBS or whatever was pretty. Who had it before CBS?
I think Infinity
Broadcasting. Yeah. That's correct. But they were not dicks to me about that. They let me go on. So they let me go promote my gigs in different markets.
Did you blame anybody for that Sex for Sam debacle? Like, was it Paul Mercurio's fault for pushing the envelope? Was it me on the dump button for missing something? Was it management for okaying everything and then firing them? It
was a combination. Sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, it was a combination. It was. I blamed Mercurio incorrectly, and I really never should have blamed Paul, because he was just doing what was in the spirit of the show. Opie yelled, "Go in." I remember Ben was going, "Don't do it." But I was right there with it. Management could have said, don't do it. Paul could have not done it. It was a combination of everybody was participating in it. So for me to blame Paul was unfair. And I kind of wish I hadn't, but it was just stupid. It was almost like, hey, you have to look at something. And that was just the easiest and most obvious. But management was technically the ones who should have been blamed, because they allowed the competition, and they shouldn't have fired the show. So my blame should have been directed on management, for allowing it and saying, yeah, you can do this. And then the company for buckling to pressure from one guy.
Ron Bennington, when I spoke to him on this podcast, he said that he thinks shows should have an ending. Like that sometimes it's not good when a show goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
Like that a show like Opie and Anthony should have blown itself up.
It should have, because you look back and you go, well, like we look at what makes things feel like legendary or like, wow. But that's in hindsight. In the moment, everything, you want it to end on your own terms. Like you don't want it to end over something stupid. You want it to end because the guy, like, hey, Kevin and Bean just split. They broke up, or this show breaks up, or that show breaks up. But look, Stern is still going. And there's people who would say, hey, it's not the same show. All right, fine. But he's still doing it in a way that he wants to do it for people who like it. Like, you know what I mean? If some of his hardcore fans don't enjoy it anymore, fine. I'm sure some of ours can't stand Oprah, myself, or Ann, or fine. I mean, it's fair judgment. But you want it to end on your own, under your own reasons. You don't want it to be because of a stupid thing like that,
Yeah. And when you guys were doing afternoons like that, what were your days like? Because you would do stand up at night. Would you go right from the show when it would end at like 7:00?
Yep. Right down and do gigs. I'd probably do 2 or 3 or sometimes 4 sets a night. I was a crazy doing stand up every night back then. And then again, look at prostitutes all night, ride around in the meatpacking district, looking at girls, or go home on Craigslist and, just spend hours looking and then, masturbate, go to sleep at 6, maybe wake up at 1 and go in and do it again. It was a crazy existence. Crazy.
Yes, that was, and then you'd be working all weekend doing shows.
Sure. Yeah. Sometimes I'd be away. And of course, if Dice needed me, I was always working with Andrew. But once I was on O&A, I didn't tour with Dice as much, because then 9/11 happened and, and then we got kicked off in 2002. So Andrew and I, we worked together mostly from 97 to about 2000, 2001. I toured very heavily with Dice.
Now, they also, CBS brought the show back on 92.3 after it was on satellite. I don't even remember how many years it was on satellite before they brought them back. I think they came back in 2006.
It's 6 or 7. It might have been. Yeah.
I think it was 6, like
right.
May or June of 2006. That's when David Lee Roth, that ended very quickly. But I felt like, and maybe it was, you guys had gone through the Sex or Sam thing. Things had changed. You had an outlet at XM where you can go crazy, do whatever you want. But I thought it was very weird because I was put in charge of the dump button again.
Yeah.
It was so weird to have a friendly, nice Opie and Anthony talking to me about content, where at NEW, it was, the dump guy was the enemy and we would try to sneak things by him. Instead, it'd be like guys would come down the hallway and say, hey, we'd really love to get this on. What do we need to take out? And it was just such a weird,
yeah.
It's like, there's something's missing here.
You know what it was too? I mean, I hated those years. I liked the money. But I hated those years because it was a longer show and we would do 3 hours that were good for both the beginning. Were good for, regular and the satellite fans by and large hated it. We got some great bits though. I mean, the Baby Bird bit was from NEW. Although that might've just been on XM. We might have just used that for XM. I don't know if that ever technically got broadcasted over the airwaves of
I don't remember.
I don't remember. That might have been.
It may have been one of those things where you did the setup on 92.3, did the actual thing over at XM, and then played an edited version of it the next morning. Yeah, on 92.3.
I had a real weird hatred of the K-Rock situation because the O&A ratings weren't what they wanted them to be, but those guys really were not getting along at all. Like they didn't enjoy each other anymore. It was just too much. And they were, and the radio station was blaming me for the ratings.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah, they thought it was Jim Norton's fault. And I'm like, What are you talking about? I was on the show when it was doing a 20 share in Cleveland in afternoons. What do you mean? And they were trying to blame me. And so they wanted to fire me, or they wanted me only to go on satellite, like not show up, or only do 3 days a week or some garbage. And so we never said it publicly, but the way we structured my new 3 day a week thing was I would go out and do, because I was going to shoot an HBO special in 2007. So what I would do is I would go out, I would do Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday shows and fly home Monday. So I would do Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday with Opie and Anthony, fly out Thursday, do Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday with a gig. Like, 'cause I was working on material anyway. So the audience didn't really even notice that my presence was cut down a lot because I was away doing gigs, warming up for an HBO special. So once, it kind of worked out. And then we had the homeless Charlie thing happen where we thought we were going to get fired. So they kicked us off satellite for a while. And when that happened, O&A read a statement on 92.3, and then the whole thing got forgotten. I just started coming back in. I just came in when I wanted. Nobody said a word. So that was what kind of kept me. And I actually got an apology from one of the guys who in management. He goes, "I'm sorry, I blamed you. I shouldn't have. It wasn't you. It was this and that." So I kind of felt better about that. But yeah, I kind of always hated the company for that. And I went to a meeting one time with a couple of the bosses and one of the new presidents. And we were just talking about language and what we were allowed to get away with and racial jokes. And I remember I was sitting there with, again, it was like, I think the new guy who was the president of CBS Radio and Tom and Opie and Anthony and somebody else. And we were talking about racist jokes. Like, yeah, you just can't do them. Can't do any Asian jokes. And I remember pointing out, I'm like, we're running an ad right now for a comedian. And in the ad, there are Asian jokes. And they said, well, he's half Asian. And I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, well, it's like Irish brothers. We can make fun of ourselves. And I'm like, okay, well, fine. But would you put that in writing? Meaning, would you put that in writing that you can make fun of who you are? Because I don't want to get fired or have my contract invalidated. But of course, they wouldn't put it in writing. But I remember asking for that in writing. So, that we could say certain things and couldn't. Maybe that's another reason they hated my guts.
I remember one of the things that you were angered at after you had left is that the company put out a words hurt and harm booklet.
God, yes. Okay. Do you know
that was the title of the booklet?
Yeah, it really was awful. I still have a dump sheet, a bunch of dump sheets.
Yeah,
from like 2007. It'll be funny. Louis said diarrhea 9 times. All these weird things because comedians would come in and think if you just didn't drop the C word, you were fine.
The worst was you and Anthony because you were so skilled at walking the line, and you had like a couple of seconds here or there to figure out whether something was graphic or not. Whereas like when the comedians would come in, I'd actually like those days because I'd be like, oh, I'll be able to clearly know what's getting dumped. Like I remember, Louis had been in. The worst one was Tracy Morgan came in. He was talking about coming in a girl's eye. He was saying titties, like the worst things that you would say on the radio. But yeah, when it was just you and Anthony getting on something, I'm like, what am I doing here? What do we? And you try to put it in context in the overall what's been said, how many times, all that stuff. So.
Oh, right. I forgot about that. Yeah. You guys, you would have to figure that out. What's the what's the context of this? Has something been said before that can paint the picture too clearly? Yeah. Yes, I forgot about that.
Somebody said, pull down your pants. So it's like, okay, well now you can't get away with as much things because we already have the picture of someone pulling down their pants. And then Anthony used to play what we would call the alphabet game, right? He'd say, I'd F her in the A and
That's
C
right.
all over. And I'm like, what do we do with that?
Well, here's one I just found. Let's see. This is from sometime in August of 2007.
All right.
Let's see here. Anthony, part 1 segment. Anthony went to Renaissance Festival. Girl from Playmate of the Apes was there.
That.
Working the booth, checked into hotel wearing a sword, food at festival, Anthony's girl, gallstone problems, 10 hours in ER. Her gallbladder has to come out. Norton's girl took a dump while he was in the shower. Opie has never known his girl took dumps. Like that was one of the things that didn't make the final
right
cut. And also the dump sheet, 7:15, dumb caller gave out his phone number. 7:20, you cunt, Anthony. 7:24. What word starts with C and ends with T and has UN in it? Caller. 7:50 a.m. Turn down your fucking radio, Opie. So yeah, these were some great. Really, those must have been easy. Those were
those are the easy ones. In fact, I even have a clip of some caller calling up saying something ridiculous, and Anthony saying, "Oh, that's such an easy one for Al down the hall. He's spinning around in his chair." Kicks the dumb button with his foot. Like those obvious ones.
Yeah.
Do you still enjoy taking photos with celebrities?
Usually if I interview somebody, it's rare now that I'll go get one with somebody I have no connection to, because I've met all the people I really want to meet. So I won't like hang out and wait anymore. Because I don't care about the stories I can possibly get out of it anymore. Sometimes it was fun to get a good story, but yeah, if the moment presents itself, sure. But I don't know if I would pursue it unless it was somebody really, really that I wanted to talk to.
But you were originally getting pictures with an actual digital camera. This is before our phones had cameras on them, right?
I had a belt thing. I carried on my belt. Yeah, it was like a gun, but it was a camera.
I remember that you must have not gotten a picture with Derek Jeter when you had waited a long time. That next morning, you were furious.
That's probably one of the reasons they wanted to fire me, because I really blasted Derek Jeter.
Yeah.
No, I had a photo with him, but he wouldn't sign it.
Oh, that was it.
But I kind of regretted that. Like, I was being a real dick that day. Like, Jeter's doing a charity event, and I didn't realize that I could have paid and got it signed. I didn't realize I was so stupid. But yeah, that was one of the few regrets I had, was the beating I gave Derek Jeter. Not that he ever heard about it or cared about it, but I was like, yeah, I was just being a complete ass.
And two more things, and then I'll let you go. These are two things that when I think of you all of these years later, I still think of these two things that you've said on the air. One, you said you should never have a backup plan. Like when you were getting into comedy, when you would hear somebody say they have a backup plan, that means they're going to eventually go to their backup plan. Do you still see it that way?
Yeah. I mean, you don't want to have the option. Like for me, again, I'm 52 now, but I was 21 when I started. So I was like, you're like, yeah, I can do whatever I want someday. But yeah, having a backup plan, a lot of guys go back to it. And I don't know if you're desperate enough when you have a backup plan. Like I got a GED 3 years, like when I was 19, but I have no education. I mean, what am I going to do if I don't do comedy? That's also made me very responsible with my money, because I have no backup plan. So I save money. I pay into my mortgage, all this stuff, because I'm so paranoid about it being taken away again. Like that firing, man, it was really weird for me. Like in a way it helped me, because again, I never took for granted that I would always have a job. So that probably saved me eventually for all these years I've been over at Satellite. Like I never think I'm irreplaceable. I never think I'm unfireable. Like I know that anybody is replaceable. So I think that kind of made me smarter, that horrible firing. Yeah. So not having a backup plan at that time sucked though, because I had nothing else to do.
And then I also heard you talking on the air saying that you never enjoy your success as it's happening. Like you have to, you enjoy it a couple years after it.
In hindsight, yes.
In hindsight.
Absolutely. Yes. Looking back on it, I'm like, yeah, look, that was great. Because what happens is as I'm succeeding, I can only see the end of the cliff. Like, I'm like Thelma and Louise, like, yeah, this is a great ride. But then I'm like, yeah, but look where we're headed. Like, that's how I always look at any success. Like I'm about to drive off. It's only when I look back on it and I could see the entire arc of it that I feel okay.
Yeah, that's why I enjoy doing this series just about NEW, because 20 years later, I could finally look back on it and go, oh, that was a pretty cool place to work back then.
It was, yeah.
Like management never really got involved. Like it seemed like, you pretty much could do what you want until you pushed it too far, then you got fired and the whole thing was over.
Yeah. Have you talked to Ken? What was his name? Ken Stevens?
Ken Stevens. I have not.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I always wonder what happened to those guys. Full of Jeremy, used to see a lot over at Sirius.
Yeah.
But yeah, most of those guys, the higher ups, I didn't really know, but I think Ken was as high up the ladder as I went.
Yeah. So you didn't have to deal with management, which was good.
Not much. No, those guys had to kind of tolerate it.
And then just on the topic of censorship and things, I always felt like stand-up comedy in the clubs was a place that was always going to be safe for no matter what you say. What are they going to do about it? But now I feel like there's been cases where that's not the case anymore. Like if you say something crazy in a club, it can still get you in trouble.
Sure.
Do you feel that like doing stand-up?
Yeah, because it's not about what the person said. Because cancel culture, a lot of people confuse it as like people will say, well, they're trying to get people, you said that or you said that, but it's really not about the things people say. That's the shield people hide behind. What it's really about is people like to attack other people. It feels good. That's why when you see people being burned to death in certain villages, it's because when there's a mob around, it feels good to watch somebody burning to death, whether we like to admit that or not. So if somebody has footage of somebody in a club saying something, The context doesn't matter. Where they were doesn't matter. Once the footage is out there, then people can go, oh God, they're burning this guy to death in the middle of the street. Let's stand around and help. So, you know what I mean? So no, nowhere is safe as long as there's footage of it, because it's not about what the person says. It's about the joy the onlookers get for taking part in the beating.
And are you surprised you've made it this far with all that goes on? No.
I mean, because again, I've been doing the same type of material for 30 years. I mean, you know what I mean? It's kind of it's the type of jokes I do. And again, if you're going to come after me for jokes, well, then you had better go after Stephen King for killing children in his books. And you had better go after The Sopranos for murder. Oh, that's right. You see what I mean? Like their logic always falls short. And people who are trying to ban jokes are the exact same people that they claim to hate, like religious people who don't want the Virgin Mary painted in dung, or people who protest art. That's exactly what these people are doing. So no, I'm not worried about it at all, because I've been this is the same comedian I've been for 30 years as far as what I talk about. And again, you better go after authors too. If you're going to go after me as a comedian or other comedians, you better go after actors. You better go after authors. You better go after movie producers for content in what they're in their work.
And now you do a show with Sam Roberts. You've been doing that for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
That's on what is that on Faction Talk?
Yeah, well, hopefully they'll change the awful name of that stupid channel. We're looking at, I would love a name change. But yeah, I think it's 103. We're on Monday through Thursday, 8 to 11, because listening habits changed on satellite. They told us, because again, people are commuting differently now. So it's like the first couple of hours, people just don't really listen anymore like they used to. It's a little bit later, because that hour people are kind of staying in bed instead of driving.
Do you feel more pressure being the co-host with your name on the show, or does it feel the same as when you were doing O&A?
Yes and no. I mean, again, I didn't quit Opie and Anthony. I didn't make that show fall apart. So the pressure is not like I said, fuck Opie and Anthony, I'm going out to do better things. Anthony got fired. It was terrible. Opie and I stopped getting along. Our show broke up. He was doing a show. I was doing. So it's almost like, look, we all just kind of splintered. So no, I don't feel necessarily an additional pressure, because I didn't walk away jamming my middle finger at everybody. I'll show you. It's just what happened. We all kind of drifted away. So I'm glad I have a gig. Does that make any sense? Like I would have felt more pressure if I walked away saying, I'm going to do a better show, but I'm not I'll show you, but that was never what happened. Up until the Opie and Jim Norton show fell apart, I always wanted Anthony to come back. People are always like, well, if you love Anthony, why didn't you leave satellite? Because I wanted Anthony to come back to our show. I wanted the Opie and Anthony show to exist again, and me being the third person on the show. And I had this terror that if I left, then all of a sudden they would decide to rehire Anthony, and then I'd be out in the cold. I'm not fucking going anywhere. That's where my low self-esteem, but I wouldn't even let him call it Opie and Jim, because it's Opie with Jim Norton. It has to sound different. This way, if Anthony comes back, it's Opie and Anthony, and I'm just there again like I was. There's
a clip on YouTube of an Opie and Anthony fight, and Opie says, "Listen, man, I'll go do something else," and Anthony goes, "No, you can't." Yeah,
like what are you gonna do?
So brutal.
But he's also right. It's like, this is what we do. I mean,
right.
We do radio shows or stand up. I mean, it's not just so easy to go find a different gig. If I get fired, it happens, and I know that it can happen to anybody, but I try not to be a completely reckless idiot these days on the air, but you never know, because the line keeps changing. So who knows? You say something on Tuesday that Wednesday is a problem.
And do you keep in touch with anybody from the WNEW Opie and Anthony show?
Just Anthony's one of my closest friends. I mean, I do the Chip podcast. Anthony's on 3 times a month, and he's one of my closest friends. I talk to Ant all the time. So yeah, but only him. I mean, there's nobody. I was never really, and Jeremy, I would see it Sirius all the time up until last year, of course, when we went into lockdown. But no, I just didn't see anybody there.
None of the other producers, like
Ron Bennington, of course, and
yeah.
Fez. Whenever I'm in Tampa, Fezzy will come to my show, and I still see Fez. So Ron, I'm still close to.
Yeah, I miss Fez.
Me too.
He was a great radio personality.
He was, yeah. I love him too, and it's always so good to see him. And he never tells me he's coming. I'm like, dude, stop paying for tickets. Like, I hate when I'm like, I'll get you in, but I'll usually see him like, hey, Fez is here. He wants something. I wish he would have told me he was coming. I would have come in. But yeah, Fez and Ron and Fez, of course, I still see.
Well, I appreciate you doing this. It was fun to look back on NEW. I just feel like I wanted to. 20 years has now gone by for the most part for that radio station. I miss it as a format because I don't think it really exists anymore.
Yeah.
There's a show here and there, one on satellite. You don't really get it on as a full radio station like it was with O&A and Ron and Fez. So I was just interested in looking back on it. So I appreciate you talking to me about it.
Thanks very much, man. It was really fun. It was fun thinking about. I don't think about NEW that much, and so it was kind of fun going down. And now I'm going to go look up Alan Sniffen. I'm going to run to the New York radio message board and just read it.
That is still a thing, by the way.
I know it is. It's funny. I spent literally I used to go every day see if there was any O&A update news when we got fired, and I forgot it existed until we were just talking.
Right, it'd be the New York radio message board and then the Drudge Report. We would all go to. Those were our two go to, and they both were just the simplest websites.
Yeah.
No graphics.
Really no graphics,
print.
Nothing.
Yes. All right, Jim. Thank you very much.
Thank you, pal. Talk to you soon.
All right. See ya.
All right. Bye, Alan.
Bye.